Hello and welcome to Six Pack. Today I'm gonna start a new series. What if Deku mastered the secret technique of heal and destroy? Part 1. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up. And to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
That day should have been Izuku Midoriya's death. It oozed up from the sewer, wrapped itself around his face, and attempted to push its way down his throat. He recalled the sludge villain. He recalled the white blur of panic, the burn in his lungs, and the complete silence that preceded unconsciousness. Then he recalled that he had been saved. All power. His hero. His fantasy. Only a smile remained after being lost in a haze of pressure and wind. You can't be a hero without a quirk. There is no hope, not an exception, just the facts. For 3 nights, his mother wept. On the 4th, she arrived at the dinner table with a folded flyer. Softly, I found someone, she uttered. Not a doctor, exactly. More like a spiritual healer. A therapist people say really helps with trauma. Izuku gazed down at the rice that remained uncooked. Please, Izuku. Just 1 session, that's all I ask. He didn't dispute. It didn't appear to be a clinic. Wooden floors. Light incense, hanging by the window or dried herbs. Sunlight and gentle wind were filtered through a paper screen, and a man sat quietly, cross-legged, sipping tea in the middle of the room. The man calmly said, Midoriya Izuku, with his eyes still closed. Yeah, muttered Izuku. I'm Kale. Sit. They sat for a long time in silence. The wind against the paper window was the only sound. Then, without looking, Kale inquired, What is your quirk? Izuku stiffened. I don't have one. Kale opened one eye, revealing a golden sliver of amber-caught sunlight. Does that bother you? Izuku cast a downward glance. It used to. Still does sometimes, I guess. But I'm used to it. Kale's tone remained unchanged. I didn't ask what you were used to. I asked if it bothers you. Izuku remained silent. They never again discussed it directly. However, Kale brought up the concept in more subdued ways. Do you admire the heroes on TV? Would you still want to help people if no one clapped for you? Do you think power is the same as purpose? Izuku gave a sincere response. Rescue heroes were more admirable to him than ostentatious ones. He claimed that he detested the way that quirks were viewed as grades, with higher denoting better, and when questioned about his true desires. When he said, I want to help people, even if I never become a hero. Kale remained silent. However, their next meeting was different. The sessions included strange, meditative exercises that were unusual for a therapy session. For almost an hour, Kale made him sit cross-legged on a floor mat with his eyes closed. Count to 4 while inhaling through your nose. Keep it in place. Slowly exhale and count to 6. He occasionally had Izuku move in time with his breath while wearing a blindfold. At other times, without a muscle twitch, he set a bowl of water in front of him and instructed him to breathe until the surface rippled. Don't think. Just feel, until it didn't feel like a point. Izuku ran into Bakugo on the street one afternoon. Their gazes met. The tension was there from the start. Sneering, Bakugo asked, still breathing, Deku? Tough break. Izuku's chest constricted, and then he recalled, take a breath. Hold on. Breathe out, he said, sorry, in a steady voice. And continued walking. Other changes also caught his attention. He slept all night long. He opened a notebook without shaking his hands. He had nearly 2 minutes to hold his breath. He was never commended by Kale, simply nodded. And one day, without telling him why, Kale lit a single candle and gave him a dry leaf. Breathe into your palm. Izuku did as he was told. Gold glistened in the veins of the leaf, a gentle light emanating from his hand like the sun in the morning. His gaze expanded. What is this? Kale spoke quietly, but with a tinge of fear and excitement. It's called Hammon. Kale knelt in front of a broken mirror set into a low altar made of charred bone and wood that night. Beside him, a lone candle flickered, creating lengthy shadows. He touched the mirror with his palm. Golden light rippled through it. Report. Kale let out a breath. Midoriya Izuku is quirkless. His resonance with the ripple is natural. No resistance. The first spark awakened today. Then he is the vessel. Kale hesitated. His hand moved to a notebook that had been left behind, which was filled with awkward yet sincere sketches of inventions. Support harness for rescue workers was one of them, but it wasn't for him. It was intended to assist others. The words, he, surprises me, Kale said. No bitterness, only hope. Then shape him. Guide him. Quirks have rotted the soul of humanity. We were protectors once. Now we hide in shadow. Use the boy to restore the light. Kale's voice trailed off, and if he refuses? Then use him until he breaks. The mirror grew gloomy. Kale sat quietly. He recalled Izuku's hands shaking during that first session and how, despite having nothing, he still reached for hope. Good, Kale thought to herself. However, even decent people can be damaged. He spoke almost in a whisper. Forgive me, Izuku. The UA's metal gates. Ahead, high loomed like a monument fashioned from thousands of dreams. Izuku Midoriya was standing in front of them, not in a hero costume, not full of power, but in a used uniform, holding a battered green notebook close to his chest. To calm the whirling nerves in his chest, he inhaled deeply. This time it was not fear. Not exactly. Something more subtly. A mixture of quiet hope and a certain amount of uncertainty. This was not an exam for the hero course. He wasn't here to score points for rescue or battle robots. For the support course, he was present. He let out a slow breath, recalling Kale's voice. To shape the world, first shape yourself. A craftsman's hands build more than machines, they build destiny. He was brought back to reality by the reminder. He took a step forward. There was no sense of a battlefield in the test hall. Not a single explosion. Don't yell. Just rows of modern booths filled with humming power tools, digital design tablets, and mechanical arms. Fingers twitching in his lap, Izuku sat quietly in his designated booth. It's not a fight, it's a blueprint. His screen flashed a prompt. Design a compact mobility support device for emergency responders in unstable terrain. His heart began to beat rapidly. All right. Consider. Responders in the field. Uneven surfaces. Mudslides. Earthquakes. Buildings collapsing? He gazed at the screen for an excessive amount of time. He held his fingers over the tablet. It was hot in the room. His throat began to tighten with breath. Control the breath. Control the self. He was grounded like a hand on his shoulder as Kale's words drifted back to him. Izuku closed his eyes and inhaled deeply into his diaphragm through his nose. Hold on. Then slowly leave. Once more. The panic spiral subsided. His mind became clear. His eyes opened. Now he drew his pencil more quickly across the screen, creating a schematic for a brace system intended to stabilize the ankles and knees. Plates that absorb shock. Sensors for the terrain. Shameful on precarious rock, a carbon framework shaped like mountain goat legs. He included modular accessory ports so that it could hold energy boosters or a small medical kit. Wearers would remain upright even on shifting rubble thanks to the gyroscopic balancing systems he included. It was unsightly, and very clever. Time was gone. Astonished, Izuku blinked when the last bell rang. The proctor came over and glanced at his design. Leaning in to whisper something to her colleague, she raised an eyebrow. The corner of her mouth curled into a smile. Izuku went back to the little dojo that had become his haven that evening. Clinging to the air in lazy spirals toward the rafters was the smell of burning incense. Calm and expectant, Kale stood in the middle of the candlelit room. Breathless, Izuku said, I passed, still clutching the UA confirmation notice. Kale did not applaud. He took his time embracing him. Rather, he turned away with a small nod. You're ready, was all he said. Izuku stood up and shifted. For what? Support course orientation. I can still transfer to general studies and maybe try for hero course next year. Kale turned back to him. No, Izuku blinked. No? You will not apply for the hero course, Kale stated categorically. You will walk the path that was built for you, not the one built by others. Izuku's fists clenched at his sides as he said, but that's always been the goal. Since I was little. Since I watched All Might's videos. You know that. Something softened in Kale's gaze as he took a step closer. I know. But that dream was planted in soil that never belonged to you. You were trying to bloom in someone else's garden. Izuku cast a downward glance. Then what am I supposed to be? UA's support classes include the Human Interaction Systems track. You'll gain an understanding of people's needs, feelings, and suffering. And that's where you will design. So I'm not even going into the mechanical core, Izuku said, his voice breaking. You'll enroll in electives in medicine and mechanics. However, empathy must be your cornerstone. He turned and said, Izuku, you have the heart of a healer, in a firm but kind voice. The builder's mind. And the determination of a person who wishes to alter the course of history. Your forge will be there. Izuku's chest constricted, but not out of embarrassment. It was something more profound. Perhaps it was grief, the passing of a long-held dream, or the beginning of something new. He inhaled deeply and slowly. "All right," he said, "I'll do it after that." With a rare, subdued smile, Kale said, "Then the real training begins." Izuku trained every day after that, rain or shine, ill or sore, with or without homework. At sunset, he would leave UA and take the train across town to the old district, where Kale's dojo stood behind a used bookshop, the walls creaking with memory, the wood-paneled room dim and quiet, always warm from the slow pulse of incense smoke and candlelight. It was quiet. Kale's training, however, was anything but that. Push-ups, planks, wall runs, and balance drills were the first physical activity of each day. There was no technology or weights, just muscle and breath. "Strength without breath is brittle," said Kale. "Breath without strength is wind." Izuku practiced breath-synchronized movements, a flowing form that felt part martial art, part dance, and he gritted his teeth through trembling holds, sweating through his shirt. He had to move deliberately, shifting, exhaling, and stepping, never losing rhythm, even when Kale swept his legs out from under him. After that was finished, the Hammon appeared. Kale would have him run blindfolded, navigating obstacles by tracking the movement of air, walk barefoot across cold stone with his eyes closed, feeling the world with his breath rather than his sight, and touch candles without extinguishing the flame, channeling just enough ripple through his fingertips to warm the wick. On some days, Izuku thought he was going to pass out, but Kale would just say, "Again." Izuku would also stand. Slowly, then abruptly, the changes occurred. One evening, Izuku anticipated sinking as Kale told him to cross a shallow koi pond in the back garden. His foot didn't break the surface this time, though. He walked a step further. The water repelled him as if it were afraid of him, and Hammon pulsed out from the soles of his feet as the ripples below him buzzed faintly with golden energy. Before the ripple broke and he fell in, he had taken 6 steps. Although Kale remained silent, he gave a single nod, his eyes gleaming slightly with pride. Izuku was reaching for a withered bonsai, its leaves crumbling from neglect, another time. He wasn't even trying to do anything, but as he held the small trunk in his palm, a golden pulse rushed through the bark, radiating warmth from his fingers. After twitching, the branches blossomed. As if spring had been condensed into one breath, tiny pink flowers suddenly came to life. Izuku gazed. "I didn't mean to do that." A faint smile was all that Kale had to offer. "Then imagine what you'll do on purpose." However, Kale's nights became quieter despite Izuku's increasing strength. When Izuku left, he would kneel by himself in the dojo and gaze at the blossoming bonsai, his jaw tensed and his fingers flexed as though he were resisting something. "He's making more progress than anyone else." Most of the people he had trained were resolute, furious, and eager to join the mission. Izuku, however, continued to have faith in people. No failed student ever scared Kale as much as that did. On a Thursday evening, Izuku's mother leaned against the doorframe of his bedroom with her arms folded while he packed his equipment for the dojo. "Izuku," Inko murmured, "you've been visiting there daily. Is everything all right?" Startled, he looked up. "Yes, I'm just volunteering now," he said with a smooth lie, "helping with cleaning, setting up breathing classes, and organizing equipment. It's not a serious situation." Her head was cocked. "You return home more composed. You can see better. Additionally, you appear stronger than ever." Izuku gave a slightly clumsy smile. "Isn't that good?" After a moment of more staring, Inko moved forward and embraced him. "I'm happy you gave up being a hero. I understand how difficult that was," Inko said. Izuku was about to say something when his mother interrupted him, but this right there stung him more than he wanted to care for. It sparked feelings of confusion, anger, and most importantly, hurt. "Please, don't try to be someone else and lose yourself in the process. Be yourself, honey, no matter what." Izuku blinked and smiled slowly, realizing that his mother still didn't understand him and wasn't perfect, but for the moment, she loved him, and that was all that mattered. Knowing that even if his mother really understood how he felt about his dream, he still loved her, even if she was at fault, Izuku said, "I think, I'm finally starting to be myself." It didn't feel like the rest of the campus at UA's support wing. It was a constant hum, of machines, tools, printers, welders, code, and minds at work, of metal, burnt rubber, and soldering wire. There were no soaring banners of heroes past, no giant glass windows, and no roar of combat simulators shaking the walls. Izuku's boots squeaked a little on the polished floor as he followed the painted blue line that led to Human Interaction Systems, Cohort 1. His new tablet bounced in his bag, and he gripped his notebook tightly as if it were going to fall out of his hand. He made an effort not to appear lost. His fingers twitched against his bag's strap, thinking, it's not the hero course, but it's still UA. He saw students wheeling their own tall toolkits, others calibrating mobility exosuits, and a child using fluent programming code to argue with a support drone. This place had energy, but it was a different kind. A tall teacher with silver hair and a mechanical hand nodded at him as he entered his cohort room. You mean Midoriya? You are in workstation 11. Welcome to HIS. Park your belongings, familiarize yourself, and avoid causing any trouble. In 5 minutes, the first class will begin. Izuku bowed frantically, saying, Why yes, sir, I'm grateful. Inside, the classroom resembled a hybrid of a psychology lab and a tech garage, with racks of tablet-linked visors, lockers containing specialized tools, and screens on the walls displaying citizen rescue simulations. There was a nameplate on the side of his desk with a tiny engraving. Midoriya. Designing with humans in mind, human first, eh? His heart continued to pound as he sat down slowly and ran his fingers over the nameplate. No one gave him a second glance as more students arrived, some chatting casually, others appearing to have gone 3 days without sleep. Not until, you. The terrain brace was built by you, correct? Izuku winced when a girl with pink hair and huge green goggles leaned over his desk, her breath smelling of welding fumes and coffee. Yeah, he succeeded. She leaned closer, saying, for a first build, it's not bad. It needs some stress testing and is a little bulky, but the reasoning, chef's kiss. Blinking, Izuku said, Who are you? Hatsume Mei. The greatest pro heroes in the world will use me as a top-tier support technician. Additionally, you have been formally drafted into the support club. What? It is too late. You've been selected. She rushed across the room after shoving a broken welder's visor into his hands. With his visor in his lap, Izuku sat in shock, trying to comprehend what had just transpired. Class started, and their teacher, Professor Sukahara, a middle-aged woman, gave a presentation on designing for survivors, not just heroes. It was more intense than Izuku had anticipated, but it was also thoughtful and profoundly human. However, a thought kept nagging at the back of his mind even as he frantically took notes. Assistance. It was still painful. As a child, he had assumed that meant backup, secondary, the person who supported the heroes but wasn't one of them. Bakugo's voice was almost audible to him. You're only tech support now? He slowed his pencil. Then he glanced around the room, at the poster on the wall that said, the boy across the aisle silently translating evacuation maps for the hearing impaired. The girl in the back building prosthetics for disaster victims. Help also saves lives. It just doesn't happen all the time. He straightened his posture. Perhaps he didn't believe he belonged here. Perhaps, though, it was the place where he was supposed to create something greater than himself. Later on in the week, Izuku was packing up at the end of the day when a voice interrupted the class. Izuku. Where are you heading? It's support club time. Izuku was caught by the wrist as he turned. He was drawn forward by a pink-haired girl wearing enormous goggles, whose smile was electric and wild. With trepidation, Izuku said, I never agreed to do this. You have no other option, excitedly, Mei yelled. Mei Hatsume leapt through life rather than walked. A miniature hover drone buzzed past Izuku's head and clipped a light fixture, and she practically dragged him into Lab Room B, which was less of a lab and more of a mad inventor's playground, with half-built support gear covering the walls and screws rattling across the floor. Thank you for joining the support club, Mei smiled. We build things that might or might not blow up, drink too much coffee, and have unofficial meetings every day after class. Do I need to worry about fire codes? Izuku inquired. Fire codes are recommended. She gave him a welder's visor that was cracked. Now fix that drone before it kamikazes again. In an instant, he was in. The club was packed with quirky students from a variety of programs, including general studies, mechanical, and medical. Together, they created, tested, debated, and failed. It was disorganized, chaotic. It was also familiar. Izuku was paired with a quiet student who had half-lidded eyes and untidy dark hair one afternoon during his medical elective. It appeared as though he would prefer to sleep. He asked, Midoriya, right? I'm Shino, 1C. Nice to meet you. Izuku grinned and stroked his nape. Sorry, I kind of get overexcited around learning. As they dissected a synthetic muscle fiber together, Shino shrugged. Better than being dead inside like half this class. You got that, wants to help people, vibe. Izuku blinked. That's a good thing. With a sidelong glance, Shino said, depends on who you ask. Most people say they want to help, but you actually look like it hurts you when someone else is hurting. Izuku was unsure of how to respond to that. Shino simply saw him and wasn't attempting to flatter him. That stuck. It was meant to be a standard delivery. Izuku carried a crate of battery packs down the hallway to the combat sim wing of the hero course. As he turned a corner, he was already organizing his breath exercises for the evening. And struck Katsuki Bakugo squarely. With a loud thud, the crate fell to the ground, scattering the batteries. Neither moved for a second. Bakugo's eyes narrowed. Deku? Izuku felt her heart leap. His chest flared with old panic, but he caught it. Take a breath. Hold on. Breathe out. Izuku said, I'm in the support course now. As he bent over to retrieve the batteries, he spoke steadily. Be calm. Managed. Bakugo's mouth curled. Figures. Too weak to make it in the real program. Izuku failed to step up. He picked up the remaining battery, got to his feet, and smiled slightly. I'm where I'm supposed to be. Bakugo turned to go, saying, TCH. Unexpectedly, Izuku said, Hey, Bakugo? Bakugo froze with his back to us. I hope you become the kind of hero people remember for what you did, not just how loud you were. He did not await a response. With a steady heartbeat, he left Bakugo alone in the hallway, his scowl unwavering. The bones started as the city came to an end. What was once District 14, an industrial labyrinth left to decay in the wake of development, stood just past the last bus depot, where weeds climbed chain link fences and cracked pavement gave way to dirt trails. Wallace factories. The interiors of warehouses have been destroyed. Steel beams from an unremembered old earthquake twisted like driftwood. Not even the homeless stayed in that type of establishment. Too far away from potable water. There were too many tales of what was still alive in the shadows. At the edge of that quiet was Izuku Midoriya. Except for the man who had brought him here, he was alone. Even though the dry wind rolled in off the skeletal skyline, Kale stood a few paces away, his coat still. Unspoken things weighed heavily on his face as usual. Keen eyes. Lines that are worn out. There was a silence that prompted you to whisper. Izuku didn't murmur. This is where you want me to train? He asked instead. Kale avoided his gaze. He continued to stare straight ahead. This is where you'll survive. Izuku blinked. Survive? According to Kale, for 3 days. 2 nights, no equipment. No food. No tools. Not even your notebook. You'll go in as you are. Come out better, or don't come out. It was a slap of words. Against his will, Izuku's hands clenched, but he caught himself, relaxed, and resumed his training. Inhale, hold, exhale. 4 points. There are 7 counts. 8 is a number. He was steadied by the breath, but the anxiety continued to claw. No notebook? He inquired, anticipating the response. You rely on it, Kale observed, now looking at him. Too much. You think because you can record something, you understand it. But knowledge without instinct gets you killed. Izuku's mouth clenched. I'm not trying to be a soldier. I want to help people. And help will come, said Kale in a calm tone. But first you must help yourself. When you're hungry, exhausted, alone, with no one watching. He pointed to the ruins outside. This district hasn't seen patrols in years. A villain ring used it as a smuggling route back in the day. No one ever cleared it out. Some say the stragglers are still down there, but that's not the real danger. Izuku's head cocked. Then what is? You, said Kale. Your doubts, your panic, your habits. His voice lowered as he took a step closer. Hammon isn't power like a quirk. It's life. It's rhythm. It's the current that runs through all things, and when you lose control, it stops. Out here, that might mean your heart. The air settled around them like fog, and Izuku felt its weight. He took it all in. And if I fail? Rarely, Kale shrugged. Then you'll scream. Maybe someone hears. Maybe not. Either way, the Izuku that stepped into this trial will be gone. Izuku gazed out over the shattered terrain. It appeared to be a war zone frozen in time from this vantage point. Through the husk of a station, he saw the remains of what might have been an ancient cargo tram line. Half buried in dust were sun-bleached bones, either human or animal, he could not tell. Half of a building's roof is missing. It was frightful, but a spark ignited inside him. A peculiar tranquility. No grades. Don't stare. No lectures from Quirk, not Bakugo. Only to survive. Inhale. Pay attention. Kale stepped back. You have until the sun sets on the third day. If you walk out on your own, then we begin real training. Izuku looked over at him. And if I walk out early? Kale's eyebrow went up. Then you're not ready, and I'll stop wasting both our time. Harsh. Fair, though, and as honest as few grown-ups ever were. Izuku let out a slow breath and turned back to the district. He was afraid. He was, of course. Fear, however, was not new. Since he was 4 years old, fear had been his shadow. And it wasn't noisy at the moment. His breath sounded louder now. He moved forward a step. Then another. Beyond the fence, into the rubble. Kale did not yell. There was no encouragement from him. He wasn't like that. But Kale spoke just before Izuku disappeared. Midoriya. Izuku paused. Kale looked into his eyes. Breathe like you mean it. Izuku gave one nod. Then he vanished into the city's bones. Kale watched the dust settle, alone once more. The sound was the first thing Izuku heard. Not the obvious ones. The low drone of distant air traffic far above, wind through broken rebar. It was more nuanced than that. No, the shattered silence contrasted with the sound of his own heartbeat. His breath rustled as it passed in and out of his throat. His footsteps crunched on glass and gravel. It was the clearest he had ever heard himself. Now his body moved on its own. Every movement is measured, and every step is taken with deliberate breath control. In 4 seconds. Hold on for 7. There are 8 seconds remaining. Control your lungs, and your body will follow. Kale's words replayed in his mind. Ripple dies when panic lives. The ruins encircled him like a skeleton that had been hollowed out. The once proud logos of the enormous warehouses that lined the dirt road have since faded to gray. Like nooses, the vines coiled around the scaffolding. In an old sinkhole, a broken cargo crate was partially submerged. Not even the rats came here. He was already perspiring after just 1 hour. The concrete was hot like rage, but the sun overhead was weak, hidden behind a curtain of gray clouds. Nervous but determined, Izuku navigated the fractured terrain like a mouse in a maze. He discovered the remnants of what must have been a rest area for workers. A partially collapsed bench, long-gutted vending machines, and a stack of magazines stained with rain. Everything was choked by dust. Even so, he sat down and breathed, not because he needed to sleep, but because he needed to be in control. His stomach rumbled. Izuku covered it with a hand and winced. No food. Kale had been very clear about that. Hunger is a teacher. Listen to it, but do not obey it. With his eyes closed, he extended his presence rather than his hands, using his breath. Surface ripple, which spreads tiny vibrations from the soles of his feet to gain an awareness of the terrain, was the first method Kale taught him that went beyond simple breathing. It's slower than sonar. Less precise. Originally designed to detect movement within a 5-foot radius, Izuku had once used 10 in a storm drill. He concentrated. Inhale. Hold on. Push the ripple into the ground by pushing it through your feet and legs. A slight hum. A pulse in return. Nearby, something skittered beneath the ground, most likely a rat or something smaller. Not a serious danger. Already sore, he stood and stretched. As he moved, the demolished bench moaned beneath him. He headed for one of the disused warehouses. The side of it was half peeled open, like a mauled can. The rebar protruded like ribs. But if the weather turned bad, it provided something near shelter. The air was colder inside. Breathable but stale. Golden ribbons of light caught the dust as it streamed in through a ragged skylight. Izuku took slow steps, allowing his lungs to synchronize with each one. Before each step, he used a ripple pulse to test the floor. Though he saw a hole in the corner that led into the dark, most of it was stable. Slipping into tactical mode already, he thought it might be useful later. Always keep an eye out for potential dangers, shelters, and exits, as part of his previous Kale training. Even if you're not being pursued yet. He used a corroded stairwell to inspect the warehouse's upper level. Under his hand, half the railing gave way, but he managed to catch it. No panic. No panic. Just breath. He located an old folding chair and pulled it over to a location by a broken window overlooking the main road. He would keep an eye on this. Slowly, time went by. He paid attention, waited, reflection. His stomach rumbled once more, this time, louder. He chuckled to himself, breathless and bitter. Okay, he sub-vocalized. Now I get it, Kale. He was unable to consider eating. Or education. Or your mother. Not if he wished to remain alert. Instead, he closed his eyes and started the second exercise, Ripple Bloom, which is a simple Hammond breathing technique that infuses dormant plants with energy. He looked around the warehouse and discovered a patch of weeds growing through the crevices in the floor. He knelt next to them, pressed 2 fingers against a withered leaf, and concentrated. Inhale, concentrate, and beat the rhythm of life. The plant gave off a slight shimmer. One bloom opened. Not very much, but enough to bring a smile to his face. In the late afternoon, the gray skies began to bleed orange across the cracked edges of the city. In District 14, long shadows seeped like ink across broken concrete through the crevices. The silence persisted even as the air cooled. Izuku squatted on top of a dilapidated office on the 2nd floor of the warehouse. With one hand resting lightly on the corroded ledge, he looked down at the roads. Tension caused his leg muscles to burn, but he remained motionless. Something didn't feel right. He was still unable to explain it. No shouts, no thuds of movement, no footsteps. But like heat before a storm, a wrongness pulsed slowly and subtly in the area surrounding him. He paid attention to his breathing. Inside. Hold on. Out. Pay attention. From his spine, a ripple pushed into the beam he sat on through the soles of his feet. Decomposition, wind, and the slight shifting of metal as old joints gave way to time were the vibrations that the structure returned. However, underneath it, a fresh beat, gentle, deliberate. Izuku's gaze grew strained. Someone was out there. Slowly, he slid backward, flattening his body on the ground. Every muscle in his body froze, concentrated. Then the smallest sound, gravel shifting beneath intentional steps, arrived. The raccoon couldn't carry it. For a stray dog, too slow. He crawled over to the window and looked out a little. At the far end of the road, a figure moved. It was hunched, broad-shouldered, and had an uneven frame covered by a patchwork cloak of some sort. Something was being pulled behind them. A cart? A sack? Something substantial? Izuku immediately wanted to freeze. Taking notes was his second task. His third, his instruction, was to move stealthily and vanish. He crouched low, backing away from the window. His heart started pounding. He caught his breath as it shortened. Don't panic. Inhale into your fear. Release it more slowly than it arrived. Returning down the stairwell, he slipped toward the warehouse's darker section. A splintered shelf provided cover. He watched from there. The figure approached. They were still pulling that heavy object, which was now obviously a metal cart loaded with old food wrappers, mismatched tools, and what appeared to be scavenged technology. There was a hood over their head, but when they turned, Izuku's eyes met their face, or more accurately, its absence. Old scars ran the length of the man's skin. Bolted into his face, his right eye was plated in metal. It was obvious that his left hand had changed. It was big and plated like the claw of an insect. A quirk of the mutation type, probably one that provided armor or strength. The man paused and took a whiff of the air outside the warehouse. Izuku's breathing stopped. Something was muttered by the man. Another one? Nah. You'd smell worse by now if you were a stray. He looked around the building idly, then laughed and walked away, pulling his cart out of sight as he headed down the block toward another collapsed building. Izuku waited. A minute. Next, 2. Next, 5. He didn't allow his body to slump back against the shelf until the last echoes of the cart's rattle had subsided. Sweat had soaked his palms. Anxiety and hunger twisted his stomach. His lungs hurt. He hadn't panicked, though. He had remained silent. Above all, he had sensed his arrival. His eyes wouldn't allow it, not with any tools. Using his breath, utilizing ripple, he remained motionless until the warehouse was completely dark. Through holes in the roof, stars could be seen. A fox barked somewhere in the distance. Izuku stayed up late. All he did was breathe, and bided their time until dawn. The ticking of the kitchen clock was louder than it ought to have been. By the stove, Inko Midoriya stirred a pot that had long since ceased to bubble. She took another look at the front door, but there was nothing. No footsteps. Don't text. There are no jingling keys in the lock. Her gaze strayed to the tiny message board near the refrigerator, in Izuku's meticulous penmanship. Volunteering again. Back before dinner. Love, Izuku. Dinner was over. With a sigh, she shut off the heat and poured the uncooked soup into a container. She didn't cry. Not now. The first 100 times he came home sobbing, exhausted, and mumbling about breathing techniques and support studies, she had already shed enough tears. She was still unable to get rid of the uneasiness that was churning in her stomach. It had been the previous day since he had checked in. Just training, she said out loud, as though the words had more weight after being spoken. He's with that Kale guy. Probably doing breathing stuff. Probably forgot the time. She made an effort to believe in herself. However, her hand moved by itself, opening a drawer and removing the first notebook. A battered green one. Before the blueprint diagrams, before the gear designs. Back when quirk analysis and All Might sketches were the only things available. She touched the cover with her fingers. Whispering, "I hope you're not pushing yourself again," she said. "I hope you're breathing, really breathing." Her gaze was fixed on the door. In any case, set aside a bowl for him. Silence fell on the second day, and Izuku woke up with gravel against his back. It was the coldest he had ever been without shivering. The pain in his shoulders told him he hadn't really slept, even though his body had adapted to the concrete floor during the night. In the early morning air, his breath was clearly curled, the hazy ghosts of each exhale dancing above his lips. Once more, the city was silent, too silent. Slowly, with sore neck and stiff muscles, he sat up. In an attempt to relieve the tightness in his thighs, he stretched out his legs and rolled his shoulders, but his joints protested by cracking. Lack of food, inadequate sleep, and excessive stress caused a dull ache to throb behind his eyes. The kind that never lets go and encircles your chest. Day 2. He muttered, coughing once into his arm, still breathing. In the empty building, his voice sounded odd. Too authentic. It's too loud. He felt bad about speaking at once. His stomach complained once more, louder than it had been the day before. A hollow, raw gnawing. He put a hand to his stomach. Don't pay attention to it. Transform it. Direct your energy inward. He had learned that from Kale. If you could teach your body to rely on willpower rather than food, then that hunger was a form of fuel. But there was a conflict between theory and practice. He knelt by a weed patch and moved to a shaft of light streaming through the roof. After practicing Ripple Bloom yesterday, a few had begun to bloom a little. Like it believed in something, a small white flower leaned toward the wan sun. Izuku gave a small smile. You're tougher than me, huh? He touched the stem with his fingers and channeled once more. Not much, just a kiss of life energy, a faint pulse. The plant straightened and shivered. Then he sensed it. The atmosphere changed. Similar to holding a breath. Not his, though. This place had been visited. Recently, not just the scavenger from last night. There had been a slight disturbance in the dust near the front door of the building. Just drag lines, no deep treads. As if something had been dragged in, or leave. Izuku's eyes narrowed. He got up and walked carefully, following the faint tracks outside the warehouse. His breathing timed each step. Once more, he allowed his awareness to spread through the soles of his feet, layering it with a slow surface ripple that extended 3 meters in front of him. The trail wound through a small opening between 2 buildings and around the side of a storage unit that had collapsed, its old boxes and beams reduced to junk. He found it there, under a downed billboard, a camp. Cans piled into a windbreak, a fire pit lined with melted battery parts, and makeshift bedding made out of packing foam and trash bags all indicated that someone had been squatting here for a while. There were a few ripped pieces of clothing lying around. He saw an empty ration pouch ripped clean down the side, and a tiny lantern powered by the sun. But nobody. Not a sound. Only the remnants. Izuku knelt down and looked into the fire pit. The ashes had a warm quality. Warm meant fresh. The person who had stayed here was close by, and may return. He let out a breath through his nose and stepped back 2 paces without touching anything. Then he came to a halt. Too thick for food and too young to be completely brown, a patch of dried red clung to the inside edge of the fire pit. Blood. New. Izuku slowly straightened. He sharpened his breath. All his instincts told him to get out, but fear was subdued by training. Watch. Examine. Make it through. Then something was pinged by his ripple, motion. Behind him. Too slowly, he turned. A figure with a heavy object jumped from above. The urge cried out, breathe, and just in time, he ducked. Over his head, a rusty crowbar crashed into the stone ring of the fire pit. Izuku rolled, clambered back up, and turned to confront his assailant, the same scavenger from the day before. He could see more now, a patchwork vest, jagged scars along his neck, and metal plates across one shoulder. The man had clenched, yellow teeth and wild, bloodshot eyes. You little bastard, spit out the man. You think you can sneak up on me? Izuku remained silent. He assumed his position, body light, pulse steady, feet grounded. No armaments. No fallback. Simply take a breath. Once more, the man lunged. Izuku let out a breath. With the crowbar raised like a butcher's blade, the scavenger lunged. With the wind tearing dust from the ground, Izuku twisted low and allowed the strike to pass over him. He crouch-landed, rolled to his left, and concentrated. Inhale. Hold on. Out. Let the charge go. Ripple surged as he snapped his fingers. His jacket's ragged sleeve, which had already been frayed the day before, immediately became rigid. Flowing through the fibers, Hammond solidified them like pliable armor. Izuku lifted his forearm and caught the blow with his rippling cloth guard as the scavenger swung again. Clang! His bones shook from the impact, but the cloth held. There was a hiss of static as the crowbar bounced off. Parlor tricks? Snarled the man. You think tricks can save you, brat? Izuku remained silent. Instead, he pulsed a ripple, outward, into the earth, and pushed both palms into the ground. The ripple pierced the cracked cement beneath the scavenger's feet as he was in the middle of a step. Moments later, a surge of energy swept up through the floor and hit the man below, grunting as he was knocked back. You little, once more, he charged. In order to push Ripple into the fabric, Izuku grabbed the side of his jacket and tossed it upward. Izuku used the jacket as an anchor to swing upward, kicking off the wall to climb toward higher ground after it hardened in midair and caught on a metal beam above. With one hand clutching rusted piping, he clung like a spider to the building's side. Like glue, Ripple clung to the wall between his fingers. The scavenger below growled, snatched up a piece of metal debris, and threw it. Izuku released his hold, then dropped like a stone, spinning, and hit the man in the jaw with a heel drop that was infused with ripples. His foot exploded with energy, sending the man sprawling. Izuku thought, panting, he's strong. Like a boulder, it absorbs blows. Power is not something I can have. The man stumbled, laughing and spitting blood. Not bad, but I've killed faster kids than you. Izuku's eyes narrowed as he asked, you fought kids before? Only the ones who deserved it. Izuku's jaw tightened. Take a breath, pay attention. The scavenger swung wide and lunged once more. Izuku dodged. But his shirt was torn and blood was drawn when the crowbar clipped his side. He struck the floor with force. His ribs exploded with pain. Gasping, he rolled away, then slammed a hand on his wound and concentrated. To heal, Ripple. Breathe, please. He called forth the healing pulse that Kale had taught him, a warm, low vibration that would speed up clotting and ease nerve pain. The wound started to knit, however, the heat also did. A faint glow came from his palm, and steam rose. He screamed as soon as he made contact with the scavenger's arm, which he grabbed in an attempt to stop him. What the hell? Izuku pulled away. Skin blistered where the man had grabbed him. After overloading, Ripple moved into the enemy's skin and set it on fire from within. Your energy turns into fire if it overflows during healing, Kale had cautioned. Shocked, Izuku scurried back. I didn't mean. The scavenger swung wildly, howling in pain and anger. Izuku lifted his hand and slammed it into a nearby steel pillar this time. The metal became a conductor as the ripple moved through it. The pillar had a slight glow. As Izuku punched the opposite side, the scavenger swung back from behind the pillar. The man was flung into a pile of rubble as the energy exploded through the column and hit him in the chest. The dust burst. Izuku stood motionless, panting, side still hurting, and bruised. He was unsure if the man was stunned or down. The rumble followed. From above came a low shuddering moan. The already precarious ceiling of the warehouse started to crumble. No, Izuku spun around and fled. Half conscious, the scavenger crawled for the door. They both failed to arrive in time. A crash. The warehouse was sliced like a blade when a steel beam crashed between them. The room was engulfed in gray dust. As glass and concrete fell like rain, Izuku covered his face and coughed hard. When the dust settled, they were totally separated by a huge pile of debris. He heard coughing in the distance on the other side, metal shifting. Then there was quiet. Izuku staggered back, gripping his side. His whole body hummed with waning ripple energy, his jacket was ripped, and blood was drying against his ribs. However, he was still alive, and his adversary was, somehow. Kale remained motionless. Beneath him, the city spread out like a slowly decaying corpse. He remained motionless as the wind pulled at his coat. He stared at the far skyline, at the dust plume rising dimly from a fallen structure. The air pulsed with a faint, natural ripple flare. Without looking, he sensed it. He's adjusting, Kale reflected, quicker than anticipated. The silence was broken by a mechanical whir. The drone hummed into view, a sleek, beetle-like machine with symbols etched on its surface that he hadn't seen in years. It landed gently on the railing next to him, and Kale didn't flinch. There was a hiss as it opened. One folded note was inside. No signature. Not a seal. Only 6 words, written in red ink by hand. The society remembers your silence. Choose soon. Kale's mouth clenched. Ripple flared through the paper until it turned to ash with a gold edge, and he allowed the note to burn between his fingertips. He spoke to the wind in a whisper. Nobody heard it. Then he looked back at the ruins, back at the boy he had flung into the flames. A whisper. Hurry up, Midoriya, he said. You don't have time to be gentle. As the sun sank behind the debris, District 14 was bathed in copper light. Through the ruins of a skybridge that had once linked 2 towers, Izuku hobbled. Although its ceiling had collapsed years ago, the raised platform provided a makeshift shelter from the busy streets, and perhaps some tranquility, if he was lucky. He leaned his back against the cool metal of a dusty, long-gutted vending machine and went to his knees next to it. Even after the ripple healed, his side still hurt from the crowbar strike. Each breath was shallow. He could still hear the crumbling warehouse. The real thing had been that fight. Not a single simulation. No teachers waiting with quirk support equipment or clipboards. Simply take a breath. Only suffering. Simply instinct. He examined the wound once more. It was red and swollen, but it was no longer bleeding. That had been successful. But the scavenger's arm, which he burned. It wasn't healing. There was more to that. Izuku's jaw tightened. I didn't mean to hurt him like that. He recalled what Kale had taught him. Ripple is an extension of your will. When your will is sharp, it cuts. When it's kind, it heals. But if you try to do both at once, you get fire, Izuku said in a low voice. His gaze was fixed on his hands. They shuddered. He couldn't tell if it was from the weight of what he had done, pain, or exhaustion. I almost burned him alive. He wanted to defend it in part. It was the man who attacked first. If he had the chance, he would have killed Izuku. The part of me that was constantly looking for ways to help others, however, detested how simple it had been to strike back. How logical. How strong, too. He examined the ripped remnants of his jacket, which were now just about holding together. After being cleaned, the sleeves were repeatedly channeled by Ripple, which caused them to harden and burn. I turned my own clothes into armor. I climbed walls. I hid through solid steel. It no longer felt like a sophisticated martial art. It had the feel of survival, as if it were old, brutal, alive. He tried to shrink himself by bringing his knees up to his chest and encircling them with his arms. The sky became violet. Through the thinned clouds, stars bled. In another area of the city, sirens screamed in the distance. Here, however, Izuku sat by himself, trying to breathe without trembling, in the forgotten skeleton of a dead district. Then he opened his mouth and muttered in a low voice. Is this what you wanted me to learn, Kale? No response was found. Only wind. As well as the gentle movement of his heartbeat into the metal behind him and through his bruised ribs. He shut his eyes and resumed his deliberate, slow breathing. Take 4 breaths. Hold on for 7. Take a breath out for 8. Not to engage in combat. Not to recover. Not to conceal. Simply to be. Simply to continue. The chain broke off the punching bag. Bakugo continued. Gloves already sparking, he went on to the next one. Sweat clung to his back, his muscles burned, and the only light came from the flickering ceiling panel overhead. Boom. 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 The gym was deserted, and every blow reverberated like thunder. He was furious, but he had no idea why. Nobody had spoken. Nobody contested him. Today had been a blank day. However, something didn't feel right, like an absence from the space. Where there had been sound, there was now only shadow. Panting heavily, he paused and leaned forward. Tiny bursts of light exploded from his palms as his hands flexed open and closed. Where the hell are you, Deku? There was no question. More akin to a growl, like a warning yelled into nothingness. It had been days since he'd seen that nerd. Didn't give a damn, not at all. However, he did. The notion that Izuku was away from him, training, developing, evolving? He was more enraged by that than any villain had ever been. Bakugo slammed his fist into the ground while frowning. Around his knuckles, dust rose. He mumbled, "Don't die, dumbass," to himself. You don't get to go out before I beat you. On the 3rd day, Izuku Midoriya felt empty by the time the sun rose. Emptied, not tired. He moved his limbs more slowly. With each step, his concentration faltered. He had practiced his breath endlessly, but now it felt dry and heavy. Everything that remained had been burned away by his body. Each sugar reserve, all of the fat. He was now standing only by willpower. That and the possibility that Kale is observing. Izuku was unsure whether or not he wanted that to be true. With leaning walls on either side that seemed just a gust of wind away from collapsing, he pushed through a narrow alley. With each step, the dust from the concrete fell like ash. Even though his legs shook, he continued to walk. 3 days, he cryptically said. You said 3 days. His stomach groaned in desperation once more. Now he knew it was more than hunger. He was experiencing a system shutdown. He would faint if he didn't find something, anything, soon. It could be worse. He came to a halt, regulated his breathing, and lowered himself to a low position with his hands on the floor. He shut his eyes, and paid attention, with Hammond, not with ears. He reached farther than before, past the rustle of dust and the scuttling of insects. His muscles were screaming with exhaustion. He concentrated on the undercurrent he had learned to sense from Kale. Life's ripple. It was dim, dispersed, and resembled sonar bouncing off of ruins. However, there, a heartbeat, a flicker. In the northeast. Real but faint. Izuku got up and staggered forward, turning toward it. His vision was flecked with color as the buildings merged around him. However, he followed the pulse as if it were a call to return home. Down a stairwell that was slanted, around an old storm shelter's ruins. Until, at last, he witnessed it. An apple tree stood half dead, half buried in ash and rubble, half encircled by broken bricks and twisted pipes. Its leaves were brill-brown curls, its branches crooked like broken fingers, and its bark was cracked. A single apple hung like a miracle, barely hanging on to its stem. Izuku gazed at it, hope thumping in his chest. As he took a step closer, the gravity of the situation suddenly struck him. The tree was perishing. No, it had already died, and it was worse than that. Faintly resonating through the ripple was the ghost of what it had been. Like a child hiding beneath debris, the apple held on to its last breath. He put both of his hands on the trunk, splaying them against the cracked bark. Don't die, he said in a whisper. Not yet. He took a deep, trembling breath. Take 4 breaths. Hold on for 7. Take a breath out for 8. And shoved. Instead of being harsh as before, ripples surged through his body, low and golden. Under his skin, it hummed softly before moving into the tree. Gently, he pulsed it once, however, rhythmically. And once more. Beneath his hands, the bark quivered. A shudder went through the branches. The leaves were brittle and rustled. Izuku clenched his jaw and channeled again, this time concentrating on intention rather than just energy. Not recovering in a human manner. Not physical force. Life. Photosynthesis. Hydration of roots. Inhale. Equilibrium. The ripple caught onto moisture that was concealed deep within the roots and synchronized with what was still in the tree's cells. The golden hum grew louder. A single leaf unfolded. Next, 2. The apple turned from drab yellow to a gentle blush of red. Izuku gasped, losing strength, but he continued. The last pulse was more profound, more slowly, kind. Like a heartbeat coming back after a pause. Then he sagged forward, pressing his forehead against the tree's bark. He dropped the apple into his hand, warm, complete, alive. He gazed at it as if it were a sacred artifact. The words, "Thank you," he muttered. After taking a single bite, he discovered that it was the sweetest thing he had ever tasted. Almost immediately, his vision cleared. The fog cleared from his mind, but his body did not recover all at once. His breath felt cleaner, too. Izuku took a step back and gazed at the tree. It would be short-lived. All he had done was bide time. However, that was sufficient. For it. For him. He noticed something when he looked at his hands, which were now steady once more. This was Hammond's true mission. Not battle, not for survival. Repair. Link. Life. An alternative form of power. His kind. It had been days since the sky had been so clear. Like shy light, blue slipped through the cloud fissures and brushed the District 14 rooftops with warmth. The dust glistened. Sunlight flashed through broken windows like eyes in the distance. Izuku's movements had changed. He walked more slowly and deliberately. His breathing was effortless. Instead of rushing through him frantically, ripple now hummed, steady and low, like a friend strolling next to him. He was still worn out. I'm still hurting, however, something had changed. The silence no longer frightened him. He had overcome his fear of himself. He was walking across the roof of an old textile plant when he noticed a dark smear across the gravel and a fresh metal drag trail. Blood. He felt his heart quicken. Well, Izuku thought, he's alive, he was never gone. He kept low as he passed collapsed ducts and rusted ventilation units, following the signs. The ripple throbbed beneath his feet. The signals were more distinct now. He could sense life force reverberating throughout the surroundings like faint heartbeats. Then, he caught sight of him. With his mutated claw clutching his burnt arm, the scavenger sat panting against the wall of a collapsed stairwell. Where Izuku's healing had overflowed, his skin was blistered and cracked. He breathed shallowly. His eyes were still burning, though. They immediately met Izuku's. "You," sounded the man. "I should have finished you when I had the chance." "You tried," said Izuku coolly, "and you're still bleeding." The man made what sounded more like a cough when he laughed. "You think you won because you got lucky with some light show? I've killed better fighters than you." Izuku declared, "I'm not here to fight, I just want to leave. My trial ends at sundown." "No," the man snarled and pushed himself to his feet. "You don't get to walk out. Not after what you did to my arm." Resuming his charge, he swung a broken pipe behind his back. Izuku's stance changed in an instant. He rolled under the first swing and met the charge with his palms open. He ran his fingers over the gravel. The ripple exploded. The man lost his balance as a controlled shockwave erupted beneath his foot. Izuku rushed forward, slipped between the man's legs, and injected his calf with a ripple pulse. Howling in agony, the man fell to one knee. The man yelled, "You can't heal everything. That thing in your hands, it hurts people." Izuku said, "I know," now standing erect, "but it can save people, too." He held up his hand. His palm pulsed with a gentle golden light, ready to strike or heal. After examining it, the man paused. Muttered, "I was just trying to survive," the scavenger said. "They abandoned this place. Left us to rot." "I know," Izuku uttered quietly. "I was left behind too. That's why I'm here." Neither moved for a second. Then the earth shook. Not from Hammond. Not from either of them. Izuku raised his head. Behind them the tower shuddered, a hollowed-out concrete husk of a manufacturing center. Steel let out a moan. Bricks broke. With a shriek, a support beam gave way. "No," Izuku said in a whisper. With wide eyes, the scavenger turned. "What did you?" "I didn't move." As the building started to collapse, they both scurried. Izuku rolled behind a forklift carcass as he dove to the left. Debris rained down around them as the scavenger leapt down the stairwell shaft. The sky grew dimmer. Everything was sucked up by dust. It was worse than the collapse of the warehouse. Waves of support beams and roof chunks fell. Above, a water pipe burst, causing a hissing geyser to spray the wreckage. Izuku rolled into himself, arms draped over his head, armor like ripples running through his skin. He did not move. Still, however, until everything ceased to move. There was silence again, however, things were different this time. His eyes were burning from dust as he slowly uncurled. He didn't know if the scavenger had fled or been buried. Now, half of the stairwell was in ruins. The tower had been destroyed. Izuku got up with a stutter. He felt no sense of victory. He felt put to the test. Altered. A faint flicker passed across Hammond's fingers. There was still power. More powerful than previously. Not more loudly, not more intelligent, but more accurate. The sky was no longer gray when he looked up at it. The sun was starting to set behind the horizon, and it was now orange. A warm, light breeze blew past him. He gave a slight smile. And strolled back toward District 14's perimeter. District 14's corroded bones were smeared with gold as the sun hung low like a dying ember. Long shadows crept across the cracked pavement and twisted steel. Even though the day's heat had subsided, there was still a strange electrical shimmer in the air, as if the ruins themselves were holding their breath. Izuku moved slowly through it. He walked erratically. He had a ripped shirt. Dust clung like ash to his hair and face. The cloth along his ribs was smeared with blood. The other sleeve was hardened with dirt and ripple residue, and the first was completely gone. He was hurting all over. He did, however, walk tall. He was carried along like a steady drumbeat by his slow, even, and measured breathing. Every action was a proclamation. "I remain here." The city had attempted to crush him. Take away his tools, his solace, his guidance, and even his hope. It only showed what was underneath, though. A figure appeared out of the mist as he got to the district's edge, past the shattered barrier fence and the remains of outdated signage. Kale. He was standing in the same spot as 3 days ago. Crossed arms. Wind does not move the coat. His gaze was silently focused on Izuku. Izuku halted a few feet away, panting and panting heavily. They were silent for a moment. Kale examined him, taking in the burnt cloth, the bruises, and the faint hum of Ripple's fading pulse along his arms. Then, did you run? He asked bluntly. Izuku gave a headshake. Did you hide the whole time? No, Izuku muttered. But I did learn when to. Kale's forehead quirked. Just a little. Did you kill? No. Did you want to? Izuku's gaze lowered to his hands, recalling the scavenger's arm burn. The yelling. The blaze within his own hand. Almost. A long silence. Kale moved forward and took a close look at him. And now? Izuku raised his head and met his mentor's gaze. Now I know I don't have to. Kale was silent for a moment. However, his position changed in some way. Something modest. Respect, perhaps. Relief, perhaps. Perhaps worry. You walked in with breath in your chest and fear in your bones. Now you walk out with scars, and still breathing, Kale said in a steady but low voice. He gave one nod. That's enough. Izuku was unsure if it was merely an observation or approval. For him, though, it was sufficient. They turned away from the ruins and started walking side by side. Izuku nearly missed Kale's next words as they came to the trail that led back toward the city proper. He remarked, "You're not done, that was just the beginning." Izuku grinned as he looked at the lowering sun. I know. Izuku's breath left his lungs as he struck the mat with force. After coughing and rolling to his side, he hardly had time to lift an arm before Kale's staff swung down once more. Clack. Beside his face, the wooden end hit the floor. Dead, said Kale plainly. Izuku let out a groan. I thought we were working on healing today. We are, said Kale. But healing only matters if you're still standing after the first hit. He reached out and helped Izuku stand up. The lights in the dojo were low, the gleaming wood striped with early morning shadows. Every time Kale moved, a thin mist of incense swirled in the air. The smell of iron and eucalyptus. Izuku changed his position. So we're doing full sparring now? Kale walked slowly around him, rhythmically tapping the staff against the ground. Not sparring. Application. You've spent months learning how to focus Hammon through your breath, how to heal, how to feel life around you. Once more, Kale struck low. Izuku leapt and twisted, barely escaping the sweep. But the world isn't always full of things that want to be healed. Izuku blocked with a wrapped forearm, sending a ripple into the bandages as he took another jab. Golden light fizzed from the contact. Good, said Kale. Again, they made close circles. Kale delivered precise blows, short jabs, and sharp swings. Arms glowing dimly where Hammon flowed, Izuku dodged and redirected. He spoke each time Kale delivered a blow. One day, a quirk will erase someone in front of you. You'll have to decide whether to fight or fix. Izuku retaliated with a side-striking palm strike infused with Hammon. The pulse passed through the staff despite Kale blocking it. Kale's eyebrows went up. Better, Izuku said, gritting his teeth, but healing's the point, isn't it? That's what Hammon is. Life energy. Kale's gaze grew strained. He took a step back. Hammon is life. But life fights. It claws. It survives. You think trees grow politely? You think lungs only breathe when it's peaceful? He threw away the staff, then his fists went up. Again. But no staff this time. Hand to hand, Izuku's arms went up. A flurry of movement brought them together. Knees sweeping wide, palm strikes, and elbow blocks. Kale had to dodge as Izuku pulsed Hammon into a scarf that was tightly wrapped around his hand and snapped it forward. Kale grunted. Where did that come from? I've been experimenting, wheezing, Izuku stated. Kale gave a faint smile. Good. Experiment faster. 10 more exchanges followed before Kale pinned Izuku to the mat after catching him in the middle of a strike. Once more. Izuku let out a groan. You know you can just teach me with words, right? Kale held on tight. You're going to see things you're not ready for. People torn apart. Children begging to live. Villains that rot flesh and smile while doing it. Izuku ceased to struggle. Kale went on in a flat voice. And when that happens, you won't have time to pick between healer and fighter. You'll have to be both, without hesitation. He got to his feet and extended his hand. Izuku accepted it. Izuku carefully wrapped his scarf around his waist as they wiped down the training equipment, using it as a weapon in addition to being fashionable. From the other side of the room, Kale observed him. Today you used Hammond to push. Tomorrow, you may have to use it to burn. Izuku hesitated, then tightened the knot. I'll be ready. With a metallic sigh, the transport bus's doors hissed open as it came to a silent stop outside the domed building. Under the steel arch with the following words, the students filed out onto the plaza one by one. The simulation joint was unexpected. The USJ resembled a stadium from the outside. It was a labyrinth of disaster areas inside, just waiting to be escaped. With a rolled observation tablet under one arm and his tactical vest securely fastened, Izuku Midoriya moved to the rear of the group. He repositioned the scarf around his neck, which he wore more for concentration than style, and trailed the group of pupils making their way to their sectors. Midoriya, right? Went a deep voice. Izuku pivoted. As stoic as ever, Mezzo Shoji walked next to him. He absently flexed his dupli arms behind his back. You're the support kid. Thought I saw you at the fire drill. Yeah, Izuku nodded in agreement. Human interaction track. Shoji's head cocked. Didn't think support students came to USJ sessions. Izuku mentioned, observation assignment, as he raised the tablet. We're supposed to record how you all handle team-based emergencies. Tactical breakdowns. Quirk coordination. Stuff like that. A glimmer of light flickered in the air behind Shoji, then solidified into a discernible outline. Oh, that's right. I've seen you before. Exclaimed Class 1A's positive invisible girl. Hagakure Toru. You were volunteering in Recovery Girl's wing last month, right? Just organizing supplies, was Izuku's prompt, cheerful response. Not much. You moved like you knew what you were doing, she continued. Like, really knew. Thanks, I guess? They were interrupted by a gruff voice. TCH. You still here? Izuku knew who that was without having to look. Katsuki Bakugo. With his arms folded and his black boots kicking up dust with each step, he walked up the path. He was still wearing his belt without his gauntlets. Bakugo announced bluntly, "You're not in the hero course," and halted a short distance away. Izuku looked him in the eye. No, then don't get in our way. Shoji glanced between them, a little worried. Toru slipped anxiously out of sight once more. Izuku gave one nod. I won't. Bakugo took another look at him, not with outright animosity. Just with a little prudence. Recognition without comprehension. Then, with a grunt, he moved in the direction of the main group. Izuku exhaled and looked back at Shoji. Don't mind him, Shoji assured them. He just doesn't like surprises. Another voice from close by spoke before Izuku could respond. He's not wrong to be wary. Tokiyami Fumikage stood under the awning that led into the simulation center, upright and shadowed. The air was still, but his cloak stirred a bit. His eyes narrowed slightly as he stated, control, not flash, should be used to measure power. And I have a feeling you're very controlled, Midoriya. Izuku blinked. Thanks, with a courteous nod, Tokiyami turned to follow the other members of Class 1A. The support and human interaction students moved to the upper deck of the viewing area while the hero students filtered into briefing positions and the observation tablets synchronized with the internal sensors. Tucked behind a safety railing with a view of crumbling towers and cracked streets, Izuku discovered his designated station above the ruins zone. He turned the tablet on. Heartbeat sensors, movement indicators, and communication channels are listed on the loaded map. Everything is green. Everything is quiet. Focusing, he pushed a tiny ripple of Hammond through the metal after letting his hand rest on the railing. After spreading, the current returned steadily. For the time being. Kale's voice in a flashback. Kale had remarked, "You're too kind," during their morning meeting. You want to fix things. That's good. But sometimes the world doesn't want to be fixed. It wants to be fought. So you want me to hurt people? I want you to be ready when hurting is the only way to protect. Izuku glanced down at the pupils getting ready for the role-playing exercise. He was not to get involved, he only came to observe. Nevertheless, he had a gut feeling that this day would not go as planned. The illumination grew dimmer. It's not like a flickering light bulb or the dramatic lighting adjustments made to the simulation. There was more to this, a decrease in pressure. Izuku felt a faint silence that caused the hairs on his arms to stand up under his sleeves. This was nothing new to him. Kale had taken him to a cemetery during the 3rd month of Hammond training. To feel the air where breath had been lost, not for superstition. That icy silence, that void left when life departed. It was the same here. Izuku pushed a ripple through the railing with his hand once more. Nothing. It left but returned distorted, as if it had bounced off an imaginary object. The area above the main staircase then twisted down in the center plaza. Dark and unnatural, a mist started to rise and pull itself into shape. A man wearing armor around his torso emerged, covered in mist. Someone yelled, "Villains!" from below. Just as the warp finished, Hero Course students turned, and dozens of bodies poured out of the empty space. Villains. Armed. Grinning. Additionally, in front of them, a sallow figure dressed in black. His arms were slack. His hair looked even messier than it did in the surveillance photos, and that hideous, dead hand was over his face. A huge, hideous humanoid figure stands next to him. It moved forward, and Izuku could see it even from above. There were no ripples at all on its body, not even a slight bioenergy or breath pulse. Only a gap in the flow. Class 1A opened behind another shimmer. Izuku yelled, "Behind you," before he understood. It's too late. Groups of students started to disappear as they were drawn into whirling rifts that splintered like open wounds throughout the area. They were there in a single blink. The next, they had vanished. The emergency lights went red. Izuku's hands held an observation tablet that buzzed frantically. Detected emergency field disruption overriding the tactical exercise. Leave observation posts right away. From farther inside the dome came screams. One of the support students in the area stumbled back toward the stairwell, trembling in fear. Another completely froze, paralyzed by fear. Izuku shifted. Dropping to one knee, he pressed both palms to the ground. Ripple anchor. Field lock. A faint, barely perceptible pulse moved across the floor and locked into the beams of support. Immediately, everything around him, including the student next to him, stabilized. The warp's weird pull faded away. Curving around them, the mist withdrew. Breathing heavily, the student collapsed and gasped. "You okay?" inquired Izuku. She still shuddered as she nodded. "Then go. Find the evac tunnel, East Wing, now." She clambered to her feet and took off running. Izuku was standing in the now partially deserted corridor. The remaining support observers had either fled, dispersed, or were warped. The alarms had stopped working. All that could be heard, like an open wound in the air, was the low hum of Kurogiri's remaining portal. Izuku turned toward the ruins zone, which was accessible by a stairwell. He was no longer supposed to be here, not as a spectator, not as a combatant. His hands, however, remained steady. He continued to breathe steadily. And there was no fear in the ripple beneath his skin. He shifted. Once more, the tablet buzzed from a dark console behind the wall. The Hero Course student profiles had turned black on the screen. No signs. No monitoring. One word that flashes. Lost. Izuku avoided the clogged elevators and blocked stairwells by entering the emergency maintenance corridor. Now the USJ was quiet, aside from yelling in the distance. As well as breathing. His own. Long, deep, excellent. The sound of Kale's voice came from a faraway memory. When the system cracks, don't freeze. Don't save it. Watch where it breaks, and choose where to stand. Izuku's hand gripped his analysis bag's strap more tightly. Alone, breath ready, pulse steady, he entered the ruins zone through the service door. The conflict was already underway. It was eerily silent in the ruins zone. The ruins zone swallowed sound, in contrast to the mountain zone, where wind howled between peaks, or the flood zone, where echoes reverberated endlessly off water. In broken silence, the ruins of fictitious skyscrapers loomed, hollow concrete skeletons with intestines made of fake rebar. The blood smeared across one pillar said otherwise, but the entire place screamed simulation. Izuku lowered himself into a low crouch and put his hand to the floor. Outward, a single ripple of Hammond pulsed. He listened with his eyes closed. 2 heartbeats, no, 3. 1 unpredictable, 2 quick, all within 50 meters. He got up. Take a breath, hold on, breathe out. Heat was drawn into his core by each breath, through the air and into his lungs. Now the world seemed clearer, the sound sharper, the color deeper. The pulse was paying attention. He stopped as he rounded a splintered wall. 1 Hero Course student and 1 General Studies student were stranded beneath a partially collapsed support beam. Overhead, sparks flew from a broken panel. Like a ravenous animal, a tall, slender villain with metal claws for fingers circled them. "I said scream," snarled the villain. "This is the part where you scream." The pupils let out a whine. With legs obviously broken, one attempted to drag themselves backward. Izuku shifted. Silently, he drew the scarf around his neck, wrapped it around both hands, and rushed ahead. It was too late for the villain to notice him. Ripple overdrive. Impact twist. Gold Hammond lit up the scarf around his fists like fire as he delivered a low, sweeping punch to the side of the knee. There was a crunch as the villain's leg gave way. Just before Izuku's subsequent blow could crack into his chest and send him flying backward into a shattered car frame, he whirled and screamed. Izuku caught the support scarf in midair as it unfurled and began to glow faintly. The antagonist remained motionless. He knelt next to the half-conscious girl and turned to face the trapped students. "Can you breathe?" "And not well." Izuku ran his fingers over her skin and touched her ribs, just below a purpling bruise. Ripple flow. Gentle stream. The heat rushed through her body. The girl's breath stabilized after she gasped and coughed violently. Her face was colored again. The other pupil gazed in wonder. What quirk is that?" Izuku paused. Silently, "It's not a quirk," he said. "It's something older." He got up and looked around. The pupils could barely walk. If they took the right corridor, they might reach the evac wing. "You go north," he said, gesturing between two loading docks that were partially destroyed. "Emergency lights should still guide you to the exit tunnel. You're coming with us, right?" Beyond them, Izuku gazed at the tumbling skyline, where the smoke grew thicker and the heartbeats glowed like dying stars. "No," he replied. Izuku said, "I'm going deeper," and turned to leave. Through the broken remains of what had once been a stairwell, he strolled by himself. There was a part of him that wanted to follow the students, to debrief, to find safety, to return to observe and support. Now, however, he had tasted something. Take action. Not for show. Not for points, but for protection. To safeguard. His hands shook, but not out of fear, but out of control. The Hammond had never surged so powerfully during training. The stakes made it react. It desired to be put to use. He arrived at the edge of a shattered hallway and gazed down into another plaza that had fallen apart. More sobs. More dust. A young student with a broken leg is being attacked by another villain squad. Izuku took a step forward with his foot, just one breath. Just one ripple. Inside the USJ, shadows jiggled like broken film as the sky flickered overhead. Nearby, one of the simulation towers had fallen, and the metal beams surrounding the former fake subway entrance had twisted into a skeletal cage. And underneath it, 3 students were pressed up against the remains of the train car by a gang of villains. The pupils appeared to be no more than freshmen. They hadn't fought yet, because their costumes were still in one piece, but they wouldn't be around for long. One of them held onto a fractured arm. Protecting a classmate who had fainted was another. What about the bad guys? There were 4 of them. I'm laughing. Razor-thin wires, resembling puppet strings, dangled from both palms of the first. The second had smoke seeping from cracks in his shoulders and was covered in ragged volcanic rock. The third, with a barbed club that appeared to have been taken from a nightmare, loomed over the others. The fourth, who was too slender and composed, observed while holding a glass blade in her fingers. Izuku knelt with his fingers pressed to the ground behind a shattered pavement slab. 4 heartbeats. 4 dangers. 3 lives are at risk. Breathing in through his nose, he allowed the air to run down his back. There was no drill here. No rubber knives were present, and no teachers were using clipboards to observe. However, his Hammond's beat stayed constant. He got up and went out in the open. I'd leave them alone if I were you. The bad guys turned. The wire user's face flashed from surprise to amusement. Oh, look at this. One of the support rats grew a spine. Whispering, I'm not a rat, Izuku said. I'm a pulse. Then he made a move. No countdown. No rallying cry. Just momentum and breath. He lunged forward, his scarf tightening around his fists and whipping out from around his waist. Ripple overdrive. Shockwave strike. Hammond ignited the scarf like a gold electric current as his punch struck the wire user squarely in the chest. The man twitched. In midair, the wires tangled. His body slammed into the side of the subway car after flying backward. Down in a single blow, there was hardly time for the others to respond. The villain with the lava skin yelled and swung a molten fist. Heat burned past Izuku's cheek like a furnace exhale as he twisted, barely avoiding the blow. With a single motion, he yanked off his belt and poured Hammond into it. Instantly the leather hardened, glowing faintly, solid as steel. He wrapped it around the villain's forearm and cracked it like a whip. Ripple bind. The belt remained in place. Izuku sent currents into the villain's arm as he pumped energy through it. The point of contact exploded with steam. The man staggered back, howling. Izuku spun before he could escape, slamming the villain face first into a beam while dragging the belt sideways. Just two left. He was rushed by the 10-foot-tall, muscular club wielder. Izuku took off running. He was drawing the battle, though, not running away. He slammed his hand against the floor as he passed a stack of loose bolts and twisted rebar. Ripple surge. Particle pulse. A humming wave of the Hammond swept outward. The metal trembled. Then the whole heap of rubble exploded upward, slamming into him like a thrown junkyard, and the club wielder raised his weapon. His armor was fastened with bolts. His side was impaled by a steel rod. He let out a groan, tripped once, and Izuku leapt, belt still in motion, slamming into the man's face. The large one fell. The woman with the glass blade was the only villain left. She refrained from lunging, didn't yell, she grinned. "You're not in the hero course, are you?" Izuku gave a headshake. Her response was, "Didn't think so, you're too quiet, too careful." Her wrist flicked. The glass blade whirled like a saw toward him. Izuku took a step back. It made a small enough nick in his cheek to cause blood to flow. Pulling a metal shard no bigger than a silver coin out of his pouch, he turned with the momentum. Flattened it in his hand. It was charged. Ripple flash. The light burst from the shard. His inner breath was reflected directly in a solar flash. Shouting, the woman staggered back, covering her face. Izuku applied 2 fingers to the base of her spine and struck low, knocking her legs out. Just enough of a pulse to render her unconscious. She sagged. Once more, the battlefield was silent. Down, 4 villains, 3 pupils, still alive. Izuku took a step forward, his belt trailing behind him like a loose gold cord, his scarf still glowing faintly. You okay?" he inquired. He was staring at one of the students. "What are you?" Izuku hesitated, then gave a small smile. "Just someone who breathes different." He assisted them in standing up and guided them to a side hallway designated for evacuation routes. "You should come with us," was their protest, but he was already turning to leave. Returning to the smoke. Back toward the unfeelable heartbeat. The adjacent corridor's air felt off. Izuku felt it. A sort of silence that vibrated against his skin. Just 5 steps away from the fallen villains. Not the quiet that follows a fight. Another thing. He stopped, touched the ground with 2 fingers, and pulsed forward in a shallow Hammond. Nothing was found. No pulse. No opposition. Just decay. He accelerated. Izuku came to a complete stop as he turned the corner. One of his classmates, a female support student, was pinned under a support beam. Her name was partially obscured by the adrenaline. Her left arm was lost. Not smashed. Not cut. Broke apart. Near the shoulder, her skin cracked like porcelain. Slowly, the edges of her body flaked, like sand falling off a sculpture. The pain rippled across her face with each breath. "No, no, no, no." Izuku hurried over to her side and mumbled. Her eyes were blurry, her lips were trying to form words that weren't there, and she was trembling badly. Weakly, her right hand extended, grazing his scarf with bloody fingertips. He managed to catch it. "I'm here. You're going to be okay. You're not going to disappear." To prevent further deterioration, he ripped his scarf in 2 and wrapped it around the remnants of her arm. However, he was aware that was insufficient. Had Shigaraki made direct contact with her, even a single second would have been too long. He closed his eyes, placed both palms close to her heart, and inhaled deeply. Ripple flow. Internal stream. The heat rushed down. Carefully controlled Hammond flowed into her circulation, stabilizing the remaining cells rather than restoring what had been lost, to prevent the spread. He sensed resistance at once. Hammond didn't mix with decay. The ripple sizzled like fire in water, causing stinging where it touched the tainted flesh. The girl let out a shriek. Izuku tightened his jaw and concentrated more. "Breathe," he said in a whisper. "Breathe with me." As the Hammond found new pathways, blood vessels unharmed, nerves unharmed, his own pulse started to match hers. He filled her brain, lungs, and chest cavity with warmth. She let out a gasp. Her previously unfocused eyes suddenly snapped open. After 6 more seconds of holding the connection, he broke it. Her wound was steaming, but it was no longer spreading. Slowly, her face turned to him. croaking, you stopped it. Izuku's eyes were burning, but he refrained from crying. I slowed it. That's all. You're going to need surgery. A real medic. But you'll make it. Her mouth quivered. Thank you, I worked hard on that. Izuku's blood became icy. Slowly he stood up, between the wounded girl and the misty presence that now poured across the broken corridor. The man approached with a hand on his face. He appeared to be rot personified up close. His skin was peeling unevenly, and his hair was brittle and gray. His face covering hand twitched with laughter. I touched her, he declared with a hint of pride, and you undid it. Izuku remained silent. Shigaraki tilted his head and asked, do you realize how uncommon it is for someone to survive a direct decay touch? You're interesting. I don't recognize you. You're not in the hero course. I'm not a hero, insisted Izuku. He spoke steadily. I can tell. You're breathing like someone who hasn't decided whether he wants to live. Izuku looked down. Once more, the girl was breathing, steady, alive. His fists went up. I breathe because I choose to protect. That's more than you'll ever understand. Shigaraki laughed dry and high. Protect? You think breath can protect people from what I am? Then he made a move. Not a warning, don't be theatrical. A haze of motion, fingers extended, aimed directly at Izuku's chest. Izuku just managed to avoid it. Shigaraki touched the wall next to him with the edge of his hand, and the concrete instantly turned to ash. Pieces of decayed rubble fell like sand through a sieve. Izuku clenched his jaw and retreated, hands raised, body low. One touch, that's all it takes. Shigaraki stood up straight, his head cocked slightly under the hand covering his face. Casually, you fixed her, he said. I wanted her gone. You shouldn't have done that. Izuku responded, I'm not here to undo you, as he slid one foot back into a prepared position. I'm here to stop you from hurting anyone else. With his fingers flexed, Shigaraki asked, you think you can? You're not a hero. I can tell, you're too soft. Izuku remained silent. Behind him, his hands located the metal pipe partially buried in debris. His fingers curled around the cool steel as he held it tightly. There was no time for him to wait. Shigaraki surged forward once more. Izuku ducked low, deflecting Shigaraki's swipe with the pipe like a staff. Izuku channeled Hammond through the pipe, and into Shigaraki's wrist. The instant metal scraped fabric. There was a flash of steam and a crackle of golden energy. Shigaraki recoiled and pulled his hand away. He hissed, gazing at the red welt that was developing on his skin. Ah, he said. That burns. Izuku kept the pipe between them as he went around him. You rot things from the outside in. I work the other way. Shigaraki lunged once more, reckless and sloppy. Izuku took a sidestep, lowered the pipe in a sharp arc, and cracked it over Shigaraki's shoulder. On impact, a second Hammond pulse blazed through the conductor, illuminating it. Shigaraki staggered this time. But as he did, he laughed. You're trying so hard not to get touched. You know you can't win like that, right? Izuku remained silent. His boots scraped the broken tile as he retreated. He required room. It ended with a clean strike, for both of them. Shigaraki ducked under Izuku's protection while feigning a high swing. He touched the tail of Izuku's scarf, which was still fastened to his side. The scarf quickly deteriorated and began to fray. Desperate, Izuku twisted and slashed the pipe outward. It struck Shigaraki in the thigh. Another surge from Hammond. Shigaraki, however, did not recoil this time. Instead, he used his left hand to grasp the pipe's other end. It began to fall apart. Izuku leapt back and dropped it just in time. Between them, the weapon fell, one half curling away into dust, the other half blackened with Hammond residue. His tools were running low. Izuku yanked his belt loose and wound it around his arm, breathing shallowly now. He concentrated. The leather was strengthened by Hammond, which caused it to coil, lock into shape, and stiffen. Izuku sidestepped when Shigaraki attacked him once more and struck Shigaraki across the ribs with the belt, which snapped like a whip. Shigaraki staggered and hissed, slapping at his side, but the burn wasn't powerful enough to knock him down. Izuku hurried ahead. He put Shigaraki in a difficult situation by encircling his forearm with the belt. I said stop. With greater force, Hammond rushed through the contact point. A current that runs through the entire body. Mid-burst, Shigaraki screamed, not out of fear but in rage, and tore the belt loose, tearing it to pieces with his decay. Where the Hammond had struck his arm, smoke rose. The battle ended just as quickly as it started. From above came a loud crack, concrete splitting, support beams failing. Izuku raised his head. The structure above was buckling. He jumped back. Shigaraki stepped back into the mist. A huge piece of debris fell between them, blocking the way and causing dust and ash clouds to rise. Izuku rolled to his feet, coughed, and looked around the wreck. No Shigaraki in sight. Nothing but emptiness, and the girl behind him still breathing a little. He didn't pursue. He approached the student, got down on his knees, and took another look at her vitals. Steady. Alive. He glanced down at his belt, which was now ripped in two. He had trembling hands. Not out of fear, from the weariness of adrenaline. He had faced a true villain, a lethal one, and survived. However, more crucially, she was still alive. They were still settling the dust. Izuku knelt down close to the half-conscious helper he had just rescued. An unintentional barrier from the chaos outside, the collapsed ceiling created a rough wall between him and the rest of the ruins zone. It wouldn't last long, though. He was hurting all over. There was damage to his belt. He's lost his scarf. All that was left of the metal pipe he had used as a temporary conductor was ash. The inside of his lungs burned. He was still breathing. He took one final look at the student's pulse, steady. She would survive. Someone will find you, he said in a low voice, then turned to face the gap in the wall. He heard distant echoes beyond the shattered frame. Yells. Shouts. A loud crash, like a huge fist hitting concrete. Then another, and yet another. Boom, boom, boom. Rhythmic. Unrelenting. Izuku made his way to the outer edge of the ruins zone by pushing past broken walls and iron rods as he ascended through the debris. The main plaza, which is now a battlefield, was visible. It was standing there. The Nomu. It was taller than the previous villain with the club, and it loomed over every student. Like slabs of stone, muscles are packed together. Something that didn't feel like blood was pumped through its veins by tubes that pulsed from its back. However, Izuku was not immobilized by that, it was the lack of it. No pulse of Hammon. Not a ripple. Nothing. No level of life energy was registered by the creature. Not mute. Not weak. Nothing but void. A void in a world where motion is the norm. Izuku was ill. He recoiled and staggered back a step as his body responded before his mind could catch up. He knew, even though he wasn't that close, this was a dead thing. Nevertheless, it moved. All Might was standing in front of the Nomu, his arms already up, his voice booming orders. Izuku had escaped his notice. Nobody had. Izuku remained concealed behind a shattered column, staring at the monster. First came All Might, with a thunderclap. The Nomu remained motionless. It responded with a blow that shattered the atmosphere like lightning. My knees trembled, Izuku. He reasoned that it wasn't a fight. It's a war. Nothing remained in his hands. No scarf. No belt. No equipment. Just take a breath. Furthermore, breath wouldn't be sufficient to combat that. Izuku lowered his head, still in the shadows, and tried to gather his thoughts. He had done his best. Stopped a gang of bad guys. Saved 2 students who were hurt. Survived the battle against Shigaraki. Now, though, he was now witnessing a world based on quirks battle an object designed to destroy it. This creature was completely undetectable to his Hammon, which was so anchored in life and natural rhythm. And he was more afraid of that than anything else. Izuku muttered to himself, not to anyone else, as All Might fought the Nomu once more, each blow reverberating through the collapsing dome like a judgment. If I can't feel it, I can't fight it. He then turned to face his hands, which were still scarred from the fight and burned by the belt. And he made fists out of them, so I'll find a way. Like ants sifting through a fallen nest, the emergency response team navigated the broken remains of the USJ. Stretchers rolled over tiles that were cracked. Vitals were shouted by medics. Overhead, rescue robots hovered, looking for survivors who might be trapped. The air still smelled of burnt concrete and ozone, but the fighting was over, at least for the time being. Head down, coat ripped, belt missing. Izuku Midoriya strode silently down the outer corridor. Nobody intervened. He was surprised that they did. That wasn't how he was supposed to be there in the first place. He was aware that he had overreached himself. However, he was unable to feel regret for it. He walked past a line of students, dazed and covered in bandages, sitting on the curb. They sat up straighter when one of them, the girl with the half-rotted arm he'd stabilized, noticed him. Whispering, "That's him," she said. The boy next to her pivoted. "The green-haired one?" "Yeah. That's the guy the first told you about. He healed me. I don't even know how. Same, remarked a third student, who was among the ruins zone evacuees. He hit 4 villains like it was nothing. Used some kind of golden energy. Not a quirk, I asked. He said it was, older. Older than quirks? Repeated the wounded girl. I felt it. It was like warmth. Like something real. Izuku didn't look back. He simply continued to walk in the direction of the pickup van that was waiting at the site's edge. Bakugo Katsuki stood a few paces away, his arms folded, his shirt ripped and smeared with dust. Knuckles were raw on him. He had cracked boots. As he went by, he didn't glance at Izuku. Instead, his gaze was fixed on the group of students who were whispering. Flatly, you know that guy? He inquired. They both blinked. Kinda. He said he was support. Not even in the hero course. Bakugo squinted his eyes. That guy? They gave a nod. Yeah. He saved 3 of us. Took on some villains, too. Quick, focused. Like he already knew how to fight. Bakugo's forehead wrinkled. There was nothing more from him. His lips curled downward in a look that was not quite anger as he simply stared at the back of Izuku's retreating form. Just misunderstanding. Additionally, perhaps for the first time in years. I doubt it. The room, an oubliette carved beneath the skin of the world, was silent and dark. The background hummed softly of old machinery. Faintly, like veins, wires pulsed in the walls. The only source of light was a single monitor playing paused video. A low-angle, grainy security feed of a boy standing over a fallen villain, gold energy tying a leather belt and a torn scarf. Breathing heavily, Shigaraki stood in front of the screen. He whispered, "The hell was that? He burned me." The bandage on his wrist was still warm, and his raw skin was healing more slowly than it should have, so he flexed his fingers. A voice sounded from the shadows behind him. "Show me again." Shigaraki winced. He pressed a key. The video replayed. Midoriya Izuku. Advancing with accurate blows. Using metal, fabric, or even skin to charge something. Energy, not a quirk. Like sunlight caught in fists, his blows fell. Once more, the screen froze. The voice of All for One was quiet and low. I thought they were extinct. Shigaraki slowly turned. You know what that was? There was a long pause before someone said, I suspected, but I never imagined I'd see it again. Ripple energy. You'd call it something different, but it's not a quirk. It isn't? Spit out Shigaraki, because it sure acted like one. He burned through my decay like it was paper. No, said All for One. He resisted your decay. That's far more dangerous. Shigaraki's gaze grew strained. So what? He's some kind of anti-quirk freak. No, not a freak. The words were almost reverent. A practitioner of something older. A system rooted in life itself. I thought it had vanished after the quirk era began. The bloodlines, the techniques, erased by progress. This boy. All for One leaned forward a little, toward the light. He's proof something survived. Frustrated, Shigaraki folded his arms. I should have killed him. Simply put, you weren't ready, All for One said. He isn't strong enough yet, but neither are you, not against that. What even is it? Inquired Shigaraki. It didn't feel like a quirk, it felt like disruption, concluded All for One. Purity. A body trained to control energy in its rawest form. Ripple, Hammon, breath. It's gone by many names. But what matters is this. It doesn't follow our rules. It doesn't decay. It heals. It fights back. Shigaraki clenched his jaw. So what do we do about him? All for One hesitated, then grinned in the shadows. We learn. We test. We prod, and when the time comes. He pointed at the screen. We remind him why evolution made things like him obsolete. The round stone room breathes, but not in a symbolic sense. Living energy pulses faintly through the air. In silence, 12 elders sit in a circle around a brazier of blue Hammon flame. Time, war, and survival have all left their marks on each face. They're preserving a dying art form for the last time. Elder Mahari. He used it openly, on camera, in a world still ruled by bloodlines. Elder Sugimoto. The footage has been suppressed. Scrubbed by Kale, perhaps, but not before it was seen. We've had whispers from our agents. They're asking questions. Not about Hammon by name, not yet, but close. Elder Isolde. Stern, unyielding. Kale was warned. His attachment to that child clouds his judgment. He trains him in a city of quirks. It was only a matter of time before our secrecy cracked. Elder Namgung. With contempt. Even the name Midoriya is now whispered among students. What happens when he begins healing others in the open? When his light reaches the wrong eyes? The flame is silent for a long time. Then, emerging from the darkness just outside the ring, Bashir al-Hadi. Then let me speak to him. The room echoes with a murmur. He is not allowed to speak. He does not belong with the elders. Nevertheless, he advances with a reverent hand to his chest. Bashir. Kale was once my master. If he has strayed, I will remind him of the oaths we swore. If the boy endangers us, I will see his flame quenched, or guided. Azolda the Elder. Kurt, you presume much, al-Hadi. Elder Mahari. Squinting his eyes, and yet, perhaps the dog should return to its leash, if only to bite. After a moment, Elder Sujimoto said, Kale listens to few. You are one. You may go. But you will not go alone. From the far side of the circle comes a voice that sounds like raindrops falling. Lin Dao. Calm but determined, I will accompany him. Elder Namgung. An eyebrow is raised. You would defend the boy? Lin. No, I would understand him. A child trained in the ripple, raised in the shadow of Kale, deserves more than judgment passed by those who have not seen him breathe. Coldly, Elder Azolda. If he is a threat, will you kill him? Lin. Not blinked at. If he is a threat, I will not need to. Silence descends upon the elders. Once, the flame pulses. Acceptance. Elder Mahari. Then it is decided. You will leave at first breath. Speak with Kale. Judge the boy. And remind them both, the society lives because it remains hidden. Bashir makes a low bow. Lin just shuts her eyes. The only sound in the dark archive room beneath UA was the soft hum of machines. Elevated. The concrete walls were tinted red and blue as rows of servers blinked languidly in the darkness. The same clip was continuously shown on a single monitor in the middle of the room. Waves of golden energy rippled outward from a boy's palm. Knitted bones. The bleeding slowed. A girl's limbs came back to life, and she gasped. Then, not moving, unusually motionless, with his tail tucked around his paws, Nezu sat on the edge of the console. He kept his eyes on the screen. His nose twitched every now and then, but he remained silent. Just behind him, Recovery Girl stood with her arms crossed over her chest and an unreadable expression. Half in shadow, All Might hovered farther back with his arms folded. His hoodie was zipped, his gaunt features tense, and he was in his thinner form. He was not as warm as usual. It was a long time before anyone spoke. Once more, the video looped. Golden light. Restoring. Not moving. Nezu finally broke the silence. It's been a long time since I've seen a true Hammond pulse, he remarked quietly. Almost forgot what it looked like. All Might blew out a breath. It wasn't just healing. He stabilized her blood flow, realigned her ribs, and reignited muscle function in under 4 seconds, without any visible support gear. Nezu stated, he's been trained. Recovery Girl's eyes narrowed. So you're certain? Nezu nodded slightly. Oh yes. That was no accidental resonance. He's not just breathing correctly, he's channeling it. Whoever taught him didn't just show him the basics. They taught him to save with it. Recovery Girl said quietly, does that mean the society is active again? I thought they'd gone underground after? Nezu remarked, they never left, they just stopped letting us see them. With alert eyes, All Might took a step closer. You think this boy is connected to the Hammond Society directly? Nezu remarked, I'd bet my tail on it. He pressed a console button. Izuku Midoriya's strained, focused face, lit by the golden ripple that pulsed from his hand, was the subject of a pause in the screen. Nezu remarked, a quirkless boy, publicly dismissed by the top hero in the country, yet here he is, breathing life into the wounded in the middle of the battlefield. Do you see the risk? He saved her, replied All Might. He didn't lash out, he didn't hurt anyone. No, Nezu concurred. But if this footage spreads, if the world sees a quirkless child doing what even licensed healers struggle with, he becomes a symbol, and symbols draw fire. He hesitated, allowing that statement to sink in. And yet, Nezu continued gently, this technique nearly caused a world war hundreds of years ago when Quirk's first ally. Do you know what would happen if it were rediscovered publicly, misunderstood as a miracle energy anyone could use? People would riot for access. Entire Quirk factions would call it heresy. And the anti-Quirk radicals who've stayed quiet for the past decade, they'd rise again overnight. There was a chilly silence in the room. I've already begun the wipe, Nezu added. All footage showing Izuku using Hammond will be purged or encrypted. Publicly, it will be labeled a recording corruption due to villain tech interference. Recovery Girl's head cocked. That won't hold forever. It won't have to, said Nezu. Only long enough for the boy to make a decision about who he wants to be, and for us to decide how we protect him. The door opened with a hiss. Aizawa rubbed his eyes and went inside. He had a loosely wrapped scarf around his neck and appeared half awake. Got a message about footage review, he whispered. Didn't know it was a private meeting. It wasn't supposed to be, Nezu grinned, but it is now. Aizawa kept her eyes on the screen. He gazed at the motionless body. The ripple of gold. The green hair, you know. He said, that's Midoriya. Yes, replied All Might, and it's not a quirk. Aizawa's eyes grew a little sharper, but his face remained unchanged. Then what is it? Hamon, Nezu uttered. An ancient technique. Breath-based. Energy born from discipline, not DNA. I've heard of it, acknowledged Aizawa. Rumors. Fairy tales. When Nezu said, they're real, and the people who guard it don't take exposure lightly. Aizawa scowled. So what happens to him now? Nezu said, that depends, and leapt from the console. On how loud the ripples become, and whether the world is ready to remember what it chose to forget. His tail swayed behind him as he padded toward the door. For now, we protect him, quietly, thoroughly. He turned back to the still image of Izuku Midoriya before he left, his palm gleaming like the morning sun, his eyes full of resolve. Hope like that is hard to come by, he secretly said. Let's not lose it too soon. When Izuku entered the dojo, the sky was a bright orange. Behind him, the paper sliding door creaked shut. The air was still slightly scented with old incense and eucalyptus. Long stretches of shadows caught on the embedded scuff marks. Marks from months of quiet battles, breathwork, and sparring, across the polished wood floor. Kale was there already. His staff rested across his knees as he sat perfectly motionless, cross-legged on the mat. The windows and the gentle flicker of one candle were the only sources of light. At first, Izuku remained silent. Kale didn't either. He tried not to limp as he made his way to the middle of the room, hands in his pockets and still in pain. Kale's eyes opened, unflinching and serene. You're late. Izuku flinched. I had to stay at the infirmary. They said I stabilized before they could treat me. Kale remained silent. Izuku inhaled deeply. I used Hamon at the USJ. I know. A rhythm. You're not going to ask why? Eventually, Kale stood up. His motions were deliberate, fluid, and well-practiced. No, he replied. Because I already know the answer. You couldn't stand by and do nothing. You never could. Izuku's mouth clenched. She would have died. I believe you. Then why? Why do you sound so angry? Kale's eyes widened, for a moment. Because the world saw you, Izuku. The ensuing silence was more abrasive than any blade. Kale took a step forward. Do you have any idea what you've done? You revealed the ripple to a school filled with surveillance systems. To pro-heroes. To the media. To people who cannot, will not, understand what you are. Izuku retorted, I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was thinking about the girl bleeding out in front of me. And that's the problem, stated Kale somberly. You were thinking like a hero. Izuku gasped in surprise. What's wrong with that? For a while, Kale gazed at him. When it came back, his voice was low. Heroes are built to be watched. Measured. Praised or condemned. Hamon is not a tool for glory. It is a sacred inheritance. A language spoken only between the living and the willing. Izuku's fists clenched. So what, I'm supposed to hide every time someone needs help? You are supposed to choose, Kale irately said. Because the moment you act, you invite attention. And attention brings questions, and questions bring war. The word caused Izuku to wince. Kale refused to give up. The last time Hamon was used on a battlefield, nations split. Families tore each other apart, and when they realized it wasn't a quirk, that it couldn't be bought or passed down genetically, they tried to burn it out of history. I know the stories, Izuku declared. No, Kale replied. You know the sanitized stories. The ones we let you read. You weren't there when the embers faded, when our people disappeared. Izuku averted his gaze, his jaw clenched. I'm not trying to start a war. Then act like it. It hurt. Once more, the room was silent. Izuku then spoke, quietly but firmly. I didn't use Hamon for myself. I didn't do it to be seen. I did it because I couldn't let her die. Slow, unreadable breath. Kale watched him, and I'm not sorry. A long pause ensued. Turning away, Kale looked into the candlelight. You've stepped into a wider world now, Izuku. One you can't step back out of. Izuku inhaled deeply. So what happens now? Kale turned and picked up his staff. Now, he continued, you learn to walk both paths, or you'll be crushed by them. As the evening fog rolled in, long reflections of Tokyo's lights appeared on the glass terminals. Bashir al-Hadi took careful, measured steps off the train platform. The sun-dyed and rough-woven cloak he wore hardly stirred in the wind. The kamiya at his hip and the ripple-forged nimcha across his back marked him unmistakably, not as a tourist, but as a blade driven by purpose and breath. They breathe too fast here, he silently said, like they're running from something. Lin Dao trailed behind, her posture calm. With a hint of melancholy, she raised her gaze to the skyline without saying anything. Silently, they're not running, she answered. They just don't know how to stop. They arrived at a high, forgotten rooftop, an office block that had been abandoned, just outside the protective perimeter of UA. From there, the school towered over the skyline like a stronghold. Too tidy, too arrogant, too obvious. Bashir unfolded a cloth-wrapped scope while kneeling on the chipped concrete. When he first left the temple, he was given a ripple-forged lens. He manipulated the dial, focusing on a boy with green hair who was silently limping across the UA courtyard. There he is, announced Bashir. Midoriya, the one Kale chose. Lin folded her arms and stood next to him. He's only a child. Bashir remarked, and already a problem. I saw the footage before it was scrubbed. He didn't just use ripple to heal. He used Kale's breathing patterns. His form. That's his imprint. Lin's face changed only a little, then there's no doubt. There never was. With the nimcha on his back glinting in the city's gentle light, Bashir stood. When he spoke again, there was an edge of old hurt in his voice. Kale trained me to wield Hammon as a blade, to temper the current with discipline. He taught that the world feared breath not because it was dangerous, but because it was free. Lin remarked, and then he left. Bashir gave one nod. He turned his back on the temple. He began teaching softness, mercy, healing. Lin looked up at him. You speak of healing like it's treason. Bashir looked away. In the wrong hands, it is. He strolled toward the rooftop's edge, where he could see the illuminated school below. My village burned in the name of quirks. My cousins died trying to protect our last shrine. I begged Kale to help. He refused. Said fighting would only feed the flame. When Lin whispered, he wasn't wrong, he wasn't there. Bashir's voice became as hard as ice-hardened steel. He preaches peace, but trains a boy in secret to use the breath. And now that boy reveals it on a battlefield in front of pro-heroes and security drones. The council should have acted months ago. The words, they sent us, Lin said. Observe, confirm, act if needed. Bashir remained silent. The smell of summer storms and pavement was carried by the wind. Finally, Kale was my master, he said. But masters can falter. If he no longer walks with the breath, then he walks against it. Lin's face faltered. And if the boy is innocent? Bashir's hand was on his kamiya's hilt. Then may the current take him gently. Two relics of a vanished order, they stood silently, observing a distant spark flicker. I swear to you, it was like he breathed and the light came out of his hands. Although the corridor was silent, the heated voices trying to remain silent behind the closed office door were audible. Bakugo's ears sharpened as he froze in mid-step. He didn't use a quirk, a girl who sounded like General Studies said. No flash, no activation. Just breath. And that golden light. I felt it run through my chest like my lungs were rebooting. A second voice, a little shaky, said, I saw my own blood. I was bleeding out. Then he touched me, and I wasn't anymore. Bakugo took a step toward the corner, just out of sight. His hands ached. The wood in the room creaked. Your memories are confused, Nezu said in a soothing voice that was both warm and in control. The stress of the attack. The fear. Perception is a fragile thing, especially in life-threatening situations. But we're not confused, said the first voice. I know what I saw. He wasn't from the hero course. He didn't even have a uniform. He didn't blink. He just moved like he knew what to do. Another whispered, if he hadn't been there, none of us could have survived. A pause occurred. Nezu's subsequent remarks were gentle, measured. And I'm grateful you were saved. But I'll ask you one last time, for your own safety. Do not repeat these accounts. Not here, not online, not to anyone. Is he in trouble? A pause. No, Nezu replied. He's protected, and so are you. There was a gentle creak as the door opened. Bakugo hid behind the corner even more. The small group of general studies students filed out slowly, heads down, whispers dying on their lips, and he watched from a reflective window. He recognized one, glasses, short hair, and still a rigid gait. On the rescue evac shuttle, he had spotted her. Bakugo scowled. That voice. The student's description of him. Be calm. Assured. Breath-based golden energy. He moved as though he knew what to do. His fist clenched. No way. Midoriya, he whispered to himself. You think so too? A voice next to him inquired. Instinctively, Bakugo spun around in shock and saw Ibara Shiozaki. Her eyes were half-lidded with serene curiosity as she stood with her hands folded over her stomach. As though reacting to the tension, the vines surrounding her crown moved gently. TCH. Were you listening in too? Only to the wind, she uttered, looking back at the corridor. The spirit speaks through moments like these. Bakugo frowned. Don't start spouting cult stuff. She responded, I don't belong to any cult. I just practice breathing and balance. His eyes narrowed. You're acting like you know something. I don't, she replied. But I felt something that day. Amidst the violence, there was a ripple, no, a prayer. Like the sun whispered into broken flesh and told it to rise again. Bakugo looked at her intently. She gave a small smile. Whatever it wasn't from any hero course. And you're okay with that? I didn't say that, she answered. But I'd like to meet him someday. Ibara then turned and left, her vines flowing behind her in a faint spiral as if she were moving to an inner rhythm that only she could hear. Bakugo stayed behind, his mind racing and his jaw clenched. He cannot be the one, but if he is, he turned to face the administrative corridor. What on earth has that nerd been concealing, then? The candles were low and the windows were dark. Moonlight sliced like blades through the slats of the ceiling. The incense had been replaced by the smell of sweat and burnt cloth in the dojo. Izuku's breathing was labored. He stood in the middle of the polished wood floor opposite Kale, barefoot and shirt soaked through. Ever since he intervened, the tremor in his body had not subsided. The energy shook with each breath. Again, said Kale bitterly. Izuku remained silent. With his breath snapping in like sunlight through steel, he stomped forward and struck twice with fists encased in shimmering ripple. Kale used his staff to deflect the first one. The second grazed his robe as it went through the crook of his arm. The fabric was singed by ripple discharge. Kale's eyes narrowed. Too high. You're flooding the pulse. I'm holding back, yelled Izuku, if I let it fully release. You'll lose control, Kamel interrupted, and then it stops being Hammon and becomes light without wisdom. Izuku let out a breath and shook his arms. Kale approached the wall after lowering the staff. Control first, then creativity. I've been controlling it for months, Izuku declared as he took a step forward. I saved those kids because I trusted myself. I'm not just a healer anymore. Candlelight flickered across Kale's eyes as he slowly turned. Then prove it. Now they were 10 feet apart. Kale tapped the ground with his staff. You've learned basic hardening. Healing. Material conduction. But Ripple can do more than coat your limbs and mend a rib. It can shape the space around you. He pressed his palm to the floor and took a slow breath, a breath that sounded like thunder rolling inside skin. Around him, the floorboards glistened. The dust settled. A circle of pulses spread out. The phrase, Ripple Field, Kale said. Advanced zone. You enter it, your own breath turns against you. Izuku took an instinctive step back. I haven't done that one yet. Kale said, you're going to now, and moved out of the circle. Neutralize it. Izuku knelt down. Matching breath to breath, he put his hands on the ground. His ripple clashed with Kale's echo, and the initial contact ignited like oil on water. It returned the bite. Pay attention, Kale yelled. You're matching pace, not pressure. Izuku's gaze flickered. He redirected the flow, lowered his core, and exhaled through his nose. Like balancing a hot pan on fingertips, his ripple moved beneath Kale's field and then slowly raised it. It grew dimmer. Kale nodded slightly, better. At last, neither moved. Kale lowered his staff. Panting, Izuku stood his ground. Kale remarked, you're adapting faster than I expected. Izuku raised his head and spoke with pride. So, am I ready? Kale took a moment to respond. Then he moved forward and touched Izuku's chest, feeling the breath inside him rather than hitting him. Kale remarked, you're getting stronger, but strength isn't what worries me. What does? The path you choose to use it on. Izuku remained silent, However, a warm pulse rolled through his body as he exhaled once more. Not erratic, not crazy. Simply concentrate, and the room's candle flames briefly became brighter. As the energy left his hands, Izuku dabbed at his perspiration. Kale had taken a step back, silent, thoughtful. Until it wasn't, the air was motionless. At the far end of the dojo, there was a footstep. Kale's gaze jerked to the door. Before he could say anything, it slid open. A tall, thin man wearing a cloak that had been exposed to the sun stepped inside. He had a curved kamiya at his hip and a scimitar-shaped nimcha slung across his back. A faint shimmer of ripple script ran along the edge of his collar. The silence was split in two by his presence. A second figure entered behind him, a woman with long hair braided with dried peach blossoms and muted robes. Like a blade she didn't have to draw to be feared, her umbrella lay across her back. "Been a while, Master Kale," said Bashir calmly. Kale gripped his staff more tightly. "You shouldn't be here." According to Bashir, and yet, here I am. Lin made a silent bow. "Peace be with this place." Izuku took a cautious step toward Kale. "Who?" Kale held up a hand. "Bashir al-Hadi, former disciple of mine, and Lin Dao, a healer and emissary." Lin softly added, "We come with council knowledge, but not council permission." Bashir glanced over at Izuku. "So this is the one." Izuku did not back down. "You've been watching me." "Yes," Bashir replied, "and now I've seen enough to stop watching." The ripple in the room changed like a heatwave as he moved forward. Kale tried to block him, but Bashir refrained from confronting him. Bashir stated bluntly, "I'm not here to kill your student, not tonight." "Then why?" inquired Kale. Bashir looked over at Izuku. "Because I want to know if he's truly walking the path, or just mimicking it." Izuku's eyes narrowed. "You want to fight me?" "A test," stated Bashir. "You used Hammon on a battlefield. You exposed what we spent generations keeping sacred, so now you prove you're worthy of it." "Don't," cautioned Kale. Izuku gave a headshake. "No, I'll do it." Kale stared at him in disbelief. Izuku said, "I'm not afraid," and entered the circle. "If I'm not worthy, I need to know." Bashir gave a nod. "Then draw breath." As Bashir entered the training circle with the nimcha still sheathed but radiating heat from its ripple-forged edge, the dojo floor hummed with tension. Lin stood quietly close to the door, her demeanor composed yet alert. With only a heavy cloth belt, worn arm wraps, and breath flowing from his chest in slow, concentrated waves, Izuku faced him without a weapon. Kale had designed the ripple-threaded soles for his sandals. Every piece of cloth he wore served as a conduit rather than armor. Kale took a tense step back. "Bashir, don't do this." Bashir declared, "I'm not here to kill your student, but I will see if he deserves the power you taught him to touch." Unwrapping the band from his forearm and holding it like a ribbon tether, Izuku took a step forward. "If you want a demonstration," Izuku stated calmly, "I won't hold back." Bashir made a single bow, then breathed. They shifted. Bashir was the first to strike, using a snap of his waist sash made of ripple-conductive threads rather than his blade. As it snapped through the air toward Izuku's side, it flashed golden and cracked like a whip. Izuku whirled low, catching the blow with his wrapped arm and deflecting it. His own ripple dissipated Bashir's wave without coming into direct contact with the fabric, flaring at the point of impact. "Cloth to cloth," mumbled Bashir. Clever. Although he had drawn the nimcha, he had not yet swung it. Rather, he channeled a ripple burst through the floor, directly toward Izuku's feet, using the blade. With his sandals pulsing golden as they hit the floorboards, Izuku leapt. By passing through them, Ripple gained enough height to execute a twisted mid-air dodge. In the middle of his spin, he swung his cloth band like a chain, hardening it momentarily like a flexible baton as the ripple went down it. It burned Bashir's forearm, but not enough to cause any bruises. Bashir lowered his posture and smiled. "Still a boy, but you learn like a beast." The blade then emerged. Ripple flared as he swung toward his cloth conduit rather than Izuku's body. Before the strip was cut, Izuku pulled it back and wrapped it around his wrist. Dropping to one knee, he slammed his palm to the ground, sending ripples toward a bucket of water nearby through a crevice in the wood. Izuku kicked the stream with his foottrap, sending ripple-infused water in a glowing arc toward Bashir as it tipped and spilled. As metal and liquid breath collided, Bashir cut through the wave, causing ripples to clash and steam to burst into the air. Lin held up her hand. Enough. The air became motionless. Between them, steam rolled. Both warriors stood, panting, neither really injured, but both transformed. Bashir examined his forearms burn. HMPH. Izuku dropped the cloth, his hands still glowing faintly from the pulse. You held back, exclaimed Bashir. In response, Izuku said, I didn't need to hurt you. Bashir took a step back. That's exactly what I feared. Silently, Kale walked to Izuku's side. Lin moved stealthily closer, looking from pupil to master. The statement, we've seen what we needed, arrived. He conducts well. But what flows through him still wavers between flame and warmth. Bashir put his blade away. If he exposes Hammond again, recklessly, emotionally, the council won't send me next time. He paused once as he made his way to the door. Teach him balance, Kale, before someone teaches him the cost of imbalance. The smell of steam and charred wood filled the night air. With the paper door partially closed behind him, Kale stood by himself on the open balcony. Izuku lay quietly meditating below, his pulse stabilizing and his breathing still slow. Silent as smoke, Bashir moved back into view from the tree-lined shadows. He halted a few steps away from the elevated platform, just out of the candlelight's reach, but he did not re-enter the dojo. At first, neither man said anything. When he finally said, he's not what you expected, Kale didn't turn to face him. No, acknowledged Bashir. He's worse. Kale glanced in his direction. He hesitated. He showed mercy. He gave back power when he could have claimed it. That's worse, in the eyes of the society. They'll call it softness. A crack in the weapon. Kale let out a slow, nasal exhale. Then they've forgotten what Hammond is. Bashir remarked, they remember it too well, that's why they fear it. Now Kale turned to face him. His voice cut deeper but was quieter. You taught me that Ripple should never exist for war. You said it was for endurance, restoration, balance. Bashir's mouth clenched. And I watched my people burn trying to live by that. Kale did not recoil. So now you burn others to prevent it from happening again. No, said Bashir sternly. I keep the fire from spreading. I do what the council won't say out loud. I silence the sparks before they call lightning. He moved in closer, pausing at the platform's edge. Bashir remarked, I'm the best, but that's not why I was sent here. I was sent because I know you. Because I could still talk you down if this boy of yours starts drawing attention. Kale stated, he didn't draw it, the world was already looking for something to believe in. That's the problem, yelled Bashir immediately. They'll twist him into a symbol. A rebel. A weapon. Or worse, a messiah. And you know what this world does to messiahs. Kale averted his gaze. Two halves of an old breath, they stood silent once more. You trained me to heal the broken, Kale finally uttered, but I never knew how to stop the breaking until I taught him. Bashir turned to face Izuku, who was sitting quietly on the dojo steps with his eyes closed and oblivious to the conversation going on above him. Bashir questioned, does he know what you're setting him up for? I'm not setting him up for anything. Yes, you are. You're asking him to stand between a broken world and a forgotten truth, alone. Steady as stone, Kale's voice fell, he's not alone. Another long silence. Then Bashir sighed, but not from fatigue but from the burden of too many years. His words were, I'll report what I saw, that he's breathing clean. That he holds back. That he respects the current. But if he steps out of line, if he uses Ripple where it doesn't belong again, they'll send someone who doesn't knock first. Kale gave one slow, serious nod. Then I'll be the one to answer the door. Bashir paused to catch his breath, then he turned and retreated into the shadows. No farewells. Only wind. Soft shadows were cast through the plum trees behind the dojo by the moon, which was low behind drifting clouds. The dust of training was long gone. The world outside was cool and still, and the candlelight inside flickered softly against the paper walls. Izuku sat on a stone bench beside the small pond, his arms resting across his knees, bandaged fingers twitching with leftover tension. Like breath that would not go away, the fabric wraps on his wrists continued to shimmer slightly from residual ripple. He did not hear her coming. Lin whispered, you fought well, from under a willow. Startled, Izuku looked up. Miss Dao? You may call me Lin, she said, taking a cautiously elegant step forward. In prayer, she moved like the wind, not quickly, but without wasting a single motion. She was followed like a memory by the subtle aroma of peach blossoms as her robes rustled against the grass. Izuku stood in the middle, not sure whether to speak or bow first. Lin sat next to him on the bench and said, you don't have to stand, without hesitation. I'm not your elder. Izuku paused. You're with Bashir. With the society, right? Yes, she replied plainly, but not with the part that's here to judge. He looked down at his hands after swallowing. Did I do something wrong? Lin studied him, tilting her head. No, you did something dangerous. That caused him to wince. Gently, she went on. You used Hammond not as a shield, but as a signal, and signals echo. Izuku's eyes were closed. I didn't mean to. During USJ, someone was dying. And you saved them. I saw. He looked in her direction. Then why does it feel like I broke something sacred? After a brief period of silence, Lin reached up and removed a small vine bracelet from her wrist. It was made of silk thread and ripple-infused sprigs of wild herbs, and it pulsed softly, not with Hammond, but with natural resonance. She extended it. Do you know why plants bend toward the sun? She inquired. Bewildered, Izuku blinked. Photosynthesis? Lin grinned. Yes, but also, because they're reaching for something that gives them life. They risk wind, rain, even breakage, just to lean into it. Izuku gazed at the wristband, then gently took it. Her words, you are not wrong to reach, but not everything that grows in sunlight survives the storm that follows. Silently, Izuku uttered, I don't want to be some symbol, I just want to help, to heal. Then keep helping, Lin answered. But know this. Even healers leave scars. Even kindness shakes foundations. They sat silently for a while. Izuku gave her a quiet look. Why are you really here? To see if your heart could carry what your breath is learning to hold. He glanced at the bracelet below, and she got up. According to Lin, and it can, but only if it keeps listening. She knelt and walked over to the pond. Between stones, she ran her fingers over the dirt close to a wilted patch of moss. Try something, instructed her. Izuku crouched next to her and followed. Her words were, breathe into the ground, not forcefully. Gently. Through your fingertips. Think not of what you want. Think of what the seed is already trying to do. With a nod, he covered the moss with his flat palm. Inhale. Steady pulse. Slower, ripple, softer. Then he envisioned it as an invitation to grow toward the moonlight rather than a directive. The moss moved. It was subtle at first. Then, the tendrils slowly spread out from beneath his palm, pulsing and crawling as they reached. It's directed, not haphazard or out of character. Izuku's gaze expanded. I can tell it which way to grow. You're not telling it, Lin replied. You're breathing with it, guiding its desire. He took a small step back. Could this be used in a fight? Lin got back up. Yes. To bind a leg. Or pull a weapon. To grow thorns underfoot. Or wrap a wound before it bleeds too much. She spoke softly as she turned. Or to grow a wall between someone you love and the next attack. Izuku gazed at the motionless moss, his heart pounding with comprehension rather than fear. I didn't know Hammond could grow things. Lin remarked. It can do many things, if the person breathing it allows themselves to grow first. She took one final glance back. I think you'll be something new, Midoriya Izuku. Not just a conduit. Not a blade. Maybe even not a warrior. She grinned. But if you're going to be a light, you'd better learn how not to burn everything that roots itself around you. Then she disappeared into the shadows of the garden, leaving behind soft vines where her footsteps had stepped. Dawn hovered on the horizon, and mist clung low to the ground. The dew-laden trees behind the dojo swayed softly, as though the breath of those who had walked here hadn't entirely left. Ripple energy from last night's training was still humming softly in the stones. Izuku turned the corner and went outside barefoot to get some fresh air, only to almost run into Bashir, who was already fully armed and cloaked. Like a statue, the elder Ripple warrior waited for something to move. Now he had ceremonial cloth wrapped around his nimcha. A new polish gleamed on his kamiya. He appeared to have waited without straining or perspiring. Lin stood behind him, a few early blooming petals woven into her braid, her shawl slung over both shoulders. She glanced into Izuku's eyes and nodded slightly. According to Bashir, couldn't sleep. Izuku's posture straightened. No, just thinking. Bashir examined him from head to toe. You breathe quieter than you did yesterday. Izuku looked him in the eye. That's a good thing, right? It means you're beginning to listen. That's step one. There was a momentary silence. Then, with a gesture of ceremony rather than secrecy, Bashir moved closer and lowered his voice. Midoriya Izuku, he declared, by right of breath and conduit, your trial is near. Izuku blinked. Trial? Lin moved forward to stand next to Bashir. It is tradition. All who carry the ripple must present themselves before the council once their energy stabilizes. You've reached that point. Bashir went on, it's not punishment, it is confirmation. I didn't know, Izuku remarked, turning to face the dojo at his rear. Kale never mentioned it. According to Bashir, he wouldn't, some prefer their students enter unshaped. It makes the council's judgment more honest. Izuku took a swallow. So everyone goes through this? All ripple wielders, yes, Lin replied. But you'll be watched more closely than most. Izuku scowled. Because of the USJ? Because of everything, added Bashir. You've used Hammond in public. You've saved lives. You've shown creativity. But more than that, your presence stirs the current. The council wants to feel it for themselves. Izuku's gaze lowered to his hands. Lin whispered, they're not coming to punish you, they're coming to see you. And judge me. Bashir stated, all breath must be weighed before it's trusted, yours just rings louder than the rest. Izuku glanced up once more, and if I fail? With gentleness, Lin said, you won't. However, Bashir offered no consolation. If you do, then your training ends. You'll live, but not as one of us. He stated the truth without threatening anyone. Izuku stood up. Then I'll pass. Bashir gave him a final look and then nodded once. We'll see. Without saying another word, he turned and headed toward the trees along the garden path. Lin stayed. She handed Izuku a small scroll that was sealed in dried lotus leaves after reaching into her sleeve. When you're called, bring this, she instructed. It's not instructions, it's grounding. Izuku regarded it with respect. Thank you. Her smile was gentle. No need to thank breath for filling your lungs. Just use it well. Then she turned and went into the mist with Bashir. As Izuku entered, the sliding door creaked softly. There was silence in the dojo. The candle wicks were low. Pale morning light filtered through the paper slats, striping the room like silent judgment, but the sun hadn't yet reached the floorboards. Kale stood close to the wall of the shrine, breathing slowly and with his eyes closed. Just existing, not meditating. As though attempting to disappear into the quiet. You should have told me. Kale's eyes snapped open. Izuku held a scroll as he stood just inside the doorway. Despite his composed demeanor, his fingers trembling betrayed him. The trial, said Izuku. You never told me. Kale looked over at him. You weren't ready. You thought I wasn't strong enough. No, Kale took a slow, deliberate step forward. I thought you were too strong. Izuku blinked. I don't understand. Kale let out a breath. Most who enter the trial barely know how to move ripple beyond their own skin. You've healed others. Reinforced cloth. Shaped water. Fought Bashir and survived. And now Lin's taught you to grow with control. You were afraid, commented Izuku. Afraid I'd go in with expectations. I was afraid the council would see you. Izuku's gaze grew strained. Isn't that the point? Jaw clenched. Kale turned away. I've seen what happens to ripple users who shine too brightly. They don't get raised up. They get claimed. Rewritten. Or erased. You think that'll happen to me? I think the council hasn't seen someone like you in generations, Kale replied. And they don't know what to do with you. Izuku gazed at the scroll he was holding. I want to be part of the society, he replied. I want to earn it. All of it. But I can't do that if I'm always the last one to know what I'm walking into. Kale remained silent. You're right, came next. He took a step forward and touched Izuku's shoulder. I taught you to breathe, but I never taught you what to do when the air gets thin. Reaching for the nearby altar shelf, he withdrew. He pulled a bundle of folded cloth tied with 3 knots from a small drawer. He handed it over to Izuku. What is it? Kale remarked, something I never earned, but maybe, you will. Izuku gave him a perplexed look. Kale smiled slightly, not with pride or assurance, just with exhaustion. Whatever the council says, don't let them name your breath. That belongs to you. The holographic glimmer of the campus drones flickered out in shards of light as they pulled down the last of the sports festival banners. Internships, the next big step, had Class 1A buzzing. The atmosphere was electric and loud. So many offers, exclaimed Kaminari. Did you see Todoroki's list? It's insane. Kirishima smiled and said, half of them just want to say they trained him. I got a few too. Bakugo leaned against a metal railing that provided a view of the main courtyard and stood slightly apart. He was not listening to the boasting. He kept an eye on the walkway below. Because there was a familiar green mop of hair just beyond the throng of chattering students and support course technicians. No uniform. No equipment. Dark slacks and a simple forest green jacket. One shoulder was slung with a duffel bag. Midoriya Izuku. It was Bakugo's first time seeing him in months. Izuku hadn't even attended the sports festival, not even in the exhibitions that provide support. He had turned around and left the field as soon as the opening ceremony was over, vanishing into UA's interior buildings. Like a shadow going back to its origin. He had not been spotted in the corridors. Nobody discussed it. There was no explanation from the teachers. And now, he was just there, passing the main transport lot, his expression unreadable, his eyes fixed forward. Bakugo gazed. The middle school nerd wasn't the same one. Not the trembling child with notebooks and incessant mumbling. Izuku moved with purpose. He kept his eyes off the crowd. At the gates, he made no hesitation. Every step he took seemed to have a rhythm that Bakugo was unable to hear. He felt a burning sensation, but it wasn't anger. Something else was involved. Command. Silence. Wait. It was only when his boots struck the lower steps that Bakugo realized he had begun to move. Izuku was at the far gate by the time he reached the floor of the courtyard, nearly gone. With his hands clenched at his sides, Bakugo slowed. He didn't yell. Izuku, however, hesitated, only for a second. He said, without turning, "You're stronger now." Bakugo stopped. Izuku's head turned a little. Just enough to allow the words to land, not enough to look him in the eyes. "I saw your fight." Bakugo frowned. "Then why didn't you compete?" "I wasn't there to prove anything." Bakugo took a step forward. "You think you're too good for it?" "No," Izuku muttered. "I just don't need a stadium to know where I stand." There was a crackling silence between them. Izuku then repositioned his bag's strap and took another step forward. "I hope your internship goes well." Half a snarl escaped Bakugo's lips. "What about yours?" Izuku hesitated. "Mine's not through UA." Then he left. Bakugo watched him leave with a strange kind of heat burning in his chest. Not envy, not anger. Perplexity. Instinct. That presence, that walk, something about it shouted power. It wasn't a quirk, though. Furthermore, Bakugo had not yet come to understand it. On the long conference table, steam rose from 3 teacups. The festival grounds were nearly cleared outside. As the final floating banners came down, students were chatting about internships. It was meant to be a moment of celebration in a high note. The atmosphere was tighter inside. All Might said, he didn't even stay for the first round, while crossing his arms. Walked off the field before the games began. "I know," said Aizawa. "Did he at least submit a withdrawal?" "No," Aizawa replied, taking a folded piece of paper out of his coat. "Didn't have to. His general studies teacher passed this to me 2 days before the festival." He moved it over the table. Nezu made no attempt to grab it. All Might leaned in. "Internship approval." Aizawa gave a nod. "Custom placement. Off-campus. Independent therapist. Approved by the internship board under a discretionary clause." All Might scowled. "Discretionary? For therapy?" Nezu gently stirred his tea. "Not all therapy happens in clinics. Some of it happens in the field. Some of it, in the soul." Aizawa let out a grunt. "Whatever it is, it's legit." The general ed faculty signed off. And thankfully, he stopped and looked at them both. He opted out of the sports festival in advance. Made it easier to keep things quiet. "Still feels weird," said All Might. "The sports festival is a benchmark. A message to the world. And he just disappeared." Aizawa reclined. "Would have drawn more suspicion if he'd participated and then vanished. This way, people forget." "With the exception of one," Nezu remarked, "they nearly have." All Might's eyebrows went up. "Shiozaki," said Nezu. Aizawa said, "The girl with the vines? Class 1B? Nezu gave a nod. "She's been asking around. Very politely. Something about a boy with strange breath techniques during the USJ raid. She said his energy felt reverent. Her word." All Might gave him a quick look. "And you?" "Simply put, I shut it down," Nezu said. "Filed it under misinformation caused by adrenaline and trauma." Aizawa questioned, "She's not buying it, is she?" "She's stopped talking, but I'm not sure she's stopped wondering." All Might let out a slow sigh. "Has he done anything since then?" "No public ripple use," confirmed Aizawa. "He's kept his head down. No strange reports, no injuries. Honestly, he's been quiet." "Too quiet," Nezu murmured. For a moment, they were silent, only broken by the clink of porcelain. All Might tapped his teacup's side. "Do we even know what this internship is teaching him? Nezu's head cocked. Not entirely, but I know it's not just therapy, and I know it's necessary. The eyes of Aizawa narrowed. I want a full debrief when he returns. He's still a student here. Nezu glanced at both of them. His words, and he still has a future here, but let's not pretend it'll be a normal one. Izuku tied the final strap of his travel pack while the sky was still ash-colored. Only the dying embers of incense braziers that had been left burning through the night illuminated the dim courtyard behind Kale's dojo. The cicadas had not yet begun their morning song. The wind held its breath as well. Wearing the same simple training uniform he had on the day he arrived, Izuku stood in the center of the stone path. However, it now clung to a body that had been refined by repetition, bruises, and silent defiance. Kale stood on the porch and watched him. Kale remarked, "You're early." Izuku remained motionless. Didn't sleep. Kale moved slowly and deliberately as she descended onto the path. Although the firelight glinted on the silver in his temple braid, his ever-sharp eyes continued to focus on Izuku's posture. The boy straightened up. Concentrated. Ready, but not tense. Kale remarked, "It's a long journey, you could have waited until noon." When Izuku said, "I'd rather get there before the sun does, I want time to breathe." Kale hummed softly in agreement. There were no students, no yelling, no clash of breath and bone, just the two of them as they stood there for a moment. It was wait, not lack, that caused the silence. Izuku remarked, "You didn't tell me about the trial." "No," Kale replied. "I didn't." Calm but firm, Izuku turned to him. "Why?" There was no hesitation in Kale's response. "Because you weren't ready." "I still don't know if I am." "Neither was I, when it was my turn," answered Kale. "And neither was Bashir." Between them, the name weighed heavily. "He said the council's especially interested in me," Izuku stated. "They are." "Why?" Kale's eyes strayed to the trees, where the first plum blossoms had appeared. "Because they believe you to be either a prophecy or warning," he said softly. Izuku took a deep breath. "I'm just trying to do good." "And that's what makes them nervous." The wind blew. The rustle of the courtyard was like the release of a sucked breath. "Do they think I'm dangerous?" Kale's tone faltered. "They think you're unknown. And that, to them, is worse." One more quiet. Kale then turned away and gestured for Izuku to come along. "Come," he said. "Your path doesn't start on the road." He led Izuku into the deepest section of the dojo, past the private rooms and the garden hall, into a room he had never seen before. In the middle was a serene shrine, bordered by old silk curtains and surrounded by carved pillars. It smelled heavier and older, like cedar and old stone. At the distant wall, beneath a tapestry, Kale tore the cloth away to reveal a huge mirror. It was tall, oval, and framed in wood that had been lacquered black and engraved with life symbols and breathing scripts. There was a slight shimmer in the glass, but it was depth rather than reflection. As if water were just waiting to ripple. Kale declared, "This is the gate of breath, a sacred conduit. Not every Hammon user is shown it. But you need to be there by sunrise." Izuku took a slow step forward. The hum of energy layered deep beneath the glass was palpable to him. It was more than just a reflection of him, it was calling. "I just walk through." "Not quite." Kale covered Izuku's chest with his hand. "Breathe in with purpose. Out with clarity. Let your pulse match the mirror's rhythm. You don't pass through it, you join it." Izuku focused his breathing and closed his eyes. He extended his hand. Once, twice, the mirror rippled before turning silver white. Kale took a step back. "You'll arrive at the foot of the council's domain. Bashir and Lin will meet you. From there, it's in their hands." Izuku's eyes opened. His face was unreadable as he nodded. He then entered the mirror. No flash was present, not a sound. "Take a breath." Then he disappeared. Kale stayed in the room, gazing at the faint light that was still shining on the glass. He whispered, "He walks like a warrior now, but he still breathes like a healer." Then he turned and silently walked out of the gate of breath. As he staggered out of the portal, Izuku saw the world bend and twist, light and shadow warping around him. The cool mountain air suddenly hit him as his palms scraped the smooth black stone. He was no longer in Kale's dojo when his vision cleared. He was looking out over a city that shouldn't have existed from a balcony set into a cliffside. Falls cascaded down from the mountains, supplying water to meandering canals that divided into terraces with lanterns and hanging gardens. Between towers and cliffside halls, arched bridges of wood and stone, each topped with braziers lighted by Hammon that beat like living hearts. As he breathed, auraless, he uttered the name as if he had known it all along. "Midoriya, A voice as rough as sand over stone said, deep and familiar. Izuku turned and saw Bashir al-Hadi with his arms folded, leaning against the balcony rail. His amber eyes blazed with condemnation, and his scarf splintered in the breeze. "You're late," said Bashir sternly. Kale's little prodigy, stumbling like a tourist. HMPH. Izuku paused, still gasping for air. "Sorry, how long you been waiting?" Bashir said, "Long enough," and pushed off the rail. "Your face is all anyone's been talking about since the council saw that footage. Healing kids. Fighting villains. Breathing our Hammon in a city of quirks." He raised his tongue. "Half the city wants to crown you a savior. The other half wants you gone before you ruin everything." Izuku stopped. Although he had expected to feel proud of his actions, Bashir's words hit him like a ton of bricks. "Bashir," reprimanded a quiet voice. Izuku turned to watch Lin Dao emerge from an archway's shadow. The breeze carried the aroma of herbs from the pouches tied at her belt, and her robes whispered on the stone. Though her keen eyes examined Izuku as if he were a fragile patient on the verge of collapse, she approached with the composure of a healer. She said, "Welcome to Aurelus, Izuku," in a voice that sounded like water. "The city of the unwanted, and the last sanctuary of Hammon." Izuku's throat grew constricted. "Unwanted?" Lin gave a nod. "Everyone here is like you, in one way or another. Quirkless. Forgotten. Cast aside. The world above celebrates strength and bloodlines. We were inconvenient." Once more, he peered out over the terraces and noticed people. The streets, lit by lanterns, were lined with hundreds, perhaps more. Families. Kids. Suppliers. Every race, ethnicity, and background is represented. Some paused, whispering and pointing as they gazed up at him from a lower terrace. With a whisper, Izuku said, "They know me?" "They do," said Lin. "Your actions in the city spread like wildfire. Kale's attempts to hide them only fanned the flames. To some, you were hope. To others, a threat." Bashir gave a snort. Mostly a threat. A chilly knot formed in Izuku's stomach as his fists clenched at his sides. He questioned, "Then why am I here?" Bashir's eyes shone brightly. "To prove you deserve the breath you've taken. To survive the trial of the ripple. And maybe, to survive us." Izuku trailed behind Lin and Bashir down a winding stone staircase that clung to the cliff face. Below, the city spread out like a living thing, with canals and terraces intertwining in a hush of conversation and lanterns. He was followed by dozens of eyes. Youngsters peered over railings. Some adults crossed their arms in suspicion, while others nodded in silent approval as they whispered to one another. Izuku could feel the weight of the city's eyes growing heavier on his shoulders as they went lower. With a voice hardly audible above a whisper, Izuku questioned, Are they all Hammon users?" "Yes," Lin uttered quietly. "Every person here can breathe the ripple. It is what allows them to live in Tibu 8. The stone steps clattered beneath Bashir's boots. "But don't get ideas, boy. Most of them aren't warriors. Or healers. Or craftsmen of the ripple. They know just enough to breathe, to feel life move through them, to keep their hearts aligned with the city. That is all." As she led Izuku through a peaceful terrace dotted with lanterns, Lin spoke softly. She said, "Remember this, Izuku," while keeping her gaze fixed on the far-off mountains. "Our people aren't just here in Aurelus. There are Hammon users all over the world, from every nation, culture, and walk of life. Some hide in deserts, some in frozen mountains, some in cities where no one sees them." She gave a small smile. "We are everywhere the quirkless have survived, and everywhere a forgotten soul learned to breathe." Izuku's heart grew warm. For the first time, he had the impression that he was a member of a secret family that transcended time and geography. Izuku looked at a woman passing by with baskets of herbs as they kept walking. Her breath was accompanied by a subtle shimmer that resembled sunlight on water. She gave Lin a smile, but her gaze remained fixed on Izuku with a mix of wonder and concern. "So, most of them," began Izuku. Lin said, "They're not from here." In closing, Tibu 8 is a refuge, not a birthplace for most. For generations, we have sent missions to the outside world. To find the quirkless, the discarded, the ones who are willing to leave their old lives behind. To every part of the world we offer sanctuary, if they can accept it. Izuku's chest grew constricted. He recalled his solitary upbringing, the taunted taunts, and the wounds from being pushed aside in the schoolyard. Then, why wasn't I found earlier? Bashir's voice fell to a harsh, bitter rasp as he slowed his pace. "Because we don't recruit from the lion's jaws. The world above is ruled by predators, Midoriya. Japan has names that still send chills through the quirkless underground. You think it was just kids in school that hated you? No, he rested his chest. There are entire legacies that wanted us erased. Entire empires built on the belief that we're less than nothing. You were living in their shadow. Kale risked everything. Bashir, Lin cut in abruptly. His jaw tightened as he bit off the remainder of his sentence. He's not ready, she stated, in a firm but gentle tone. Let the trials come first. The truth can wait. Izuku swallowed forcefully, briefly losing sight of the city's lights. The rest of Bashir's explanation was not necessary for him to sense its weight. He realized for the first time that being quirkless was never simply bad luck, it was dangerous. At the center of Orlis, they arrived at the training arena. Instead of being a single building, it was a system of wooden beams, ropes, and stone platforms that were suspended above a chasm hundreds of feet below where water roared. The mist rising from the falls below covered the beams in a thin layer of moisture, and the air was colder here. At the edge, Bashir paused and turned, his voice rising above the river's thunder. This is where it begins. The trial of the ripple is in 3 parts. Pass all 3, and the council may let you walk out of Tibuade alive. Fail. He didn't complete. He didn't have to. With his heart pounding, Izuku took a step toward the platform. The city itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see if he would rise, or fall, and he could already feel Hammond's pulse in the air. Bashir pulled the blindfold tight over Izuku's eyes, and mist clung to his hair. Only the thunder of the waterfalls and the icy mountain air remained as the world was engulfed in darkness. Bashir said, "You'll move when I tell you," his voice resonating like a stone. "Breathe. Step. Flow. If you fall, the river will take you." Izuku took a slow breath. Inside. Hold on. Out. Hammond felt a slight pulse in his arms and legs as his heartbeat slowed. "Blindfolded?" said a mocking, jovial, and playful voice. Izuku cocked his head in its direction. The speaker was a girl with tan skin, a wild smile, and black hair tied in an untidy braid with bright pink strands. The edge of her boots and her forearms were splattered with paint stains. A belt of marbles filled with paint, paintball guns, water guns, and a couple of strangely shiny canisters clinked against her hip. Before he could ask, she said, "Tula Gonzalez," in a rich, rolling Spanish accent. She made a fake bow and said, "Mexico, Colombia, depends who's asking. Resident battlefield artist. Glitter bombs, paintball tricks, and chaos for rent. And you, Chico, are either famous or doomed." "Focus, Tula," said the cold, exact military woman behind her. She wore worn military uniforms and had broad shoulders and a pale complexion. With ammo strapped to her vest and knives, climbing hooks, and a shotgun resting across her back, she never took her eyes off Izuku. Despite her dramatic eye roll, Tula gave Izuku a wink. The woman spoke in a flat, steely voice. "This course is harder than the one we give initiates. Spinning planks, water wheels, slippery ropes. And now, blindfolded." Bashir gave a grunt. He wanted to wear the mantle of Hammond in the world of quirks. The elders decided to let him prove he can breathe when he cannot see. Izuku nodded, though his throat constricted. He allowed his Hammond to spread to his soles as soon as he felt the first wet beam beneath his shoe. With a faint creak that matched his breath, the wood became a little firmer. He heard Lin's gentle voice say, "Do not overthink it," as if it were a warm breeze. "The ripple moves where your focus moves. Feel the water. Feel the air. Trust the breath." He took a step forward. The beam swayed. His leg was soaked by a sudden stream of water that blasted from below. His feet gripped the beam like roots to the ground, and his Hammond locked his stance as he nearly faltered. "Oh," he didn't scream, exclaimed Tula, with obvious joy. Most first-timers cry for their mama by now. The military lady spoke in a cool, analytical tone. "He's holding his nerve. That's better than I expected." Izuku let out a breath, sensing the rope bridge in front of him through wind waves before his fingers ever touched it. He caught on, and as he cautiously edged across, Hammond adhered to the slippery fibers. "You'll face the spinning planks and the water wheel next," said Bashir. "Miss a step, and Orlis will remember you as a ripple and nothing more." Izuku made a thin line with his lips. He thought of Kale's training voice in the shadows behind the blindfold. "The breath is me. The wave is me. I don't tumble." He landed low after jumping to the first rotating platform. Hammond's pulse through his legs stabilized him against the spin of the moss and mist-slick wood beneath his feet. A group mutter echoed among the onlookers. Lin whispered, "He moves like he's listening to the mountain." Tula gave a single clap. Not bad, Shiko. But wait, till the wheel. She eats the brave and the stupid the same way. As Izuku crept forward, the river's roar intensified. Wet moss threatened to betray him as the rotating platform beneath his feet slowed briefly before speeding up once more. Like unseen roots, his hamon held fast to the slippery wood. From the platform, Bashir's voice could be heard. Next is the wheel, boy. Keep your center or become fish food. Don't scare him, Tula called, appearing to be relaxing in a hammock while dangling from a nearby rope. The wheel only eats most people. Captain Rhea Sloane said, enough, Tula, as her shotgun gleamed in the fog and her arms were crossed. Iron was the tone of her voice. Watch and learn. This is twice as hard as the standard course. If he makes it, he's worth the whisper his name's earned. The water wheel loomed ahead, its enormous wooden spokes turning from the force of the waterfall, and Izuku felt the air change. A spray was sent into the abyss below with each rotation. He took a breath, sensing the beat through the mist, the bridge, and the mountain's very breath. The breath is me. The wave is me. I don't tumble. Letting Hammond pulse into his hands and feet, he squatted down and stepped onto the first spoke. He was raised with each rotation and then lowered in the direction of the next foothold. He moved instinctively and vibrated while wearing a blindfold, breathing in time with the beat. Mira esto. Tula let out a start. If the Chico can do it blind, I can do it beautiful. With glittering marbles on her belt clinking wildly, the onlookers moaned as she jumped onto a parallel rope. She landed with a flourish on a slippery plank after swinging like a circus act. Show off, mumbled Bashir. Rhea said, reckless, without emotion, but her gaze shifted to Izuku. Let's see if he stays focused. Izuku took another stride forward. Through the rope and wood, his hamon murmured, feeling the faint tremor of Tula's movements, and then he felt it. A sudden rush of displaced air, a jerk, a slip. Ah! As her foot slid on the damp plank, Tula's scream broke through the din. Glitter bombs spilled like jewels as her body pitched toward the gaping abyss. Izuku was not thinking. With one hand clamping on the wheel and the other snagging Tula's wrist in midair, he lunged blind. Instinctively, Hammond flared, tightening his hold as though life itself would not let go. Got you. He gritted his teeth and strained his arm. The arena froze for a moment, only the sound of Izuku's breath and the thunder of the water could be heard. Bashir muttered curses to himself. Lin lifted her hand to her mouth. Ray's cold, unreadable eyes narrowed. Pull up! Rhea yelled. With a hard thud, Izuku swung Tula back to the platform, braced, and used the upward momentum of the wheel. She gasped and rolled to safety before bursting into a fit of laughter. Jaja. He saved me blind, the Chicos got fire. Bashir whispered, more like lungs, but there was a sliver of admiration. After catching his breath, Izuku made the last jump and landed on the distant stone pillar. He raised his hand and struck the bronze bell. Gong. Through the terraces and the mist, the sound rolled across Orlis. The city itself appeared to stop and listen for a moment. With his chest heaving and water streaming down his face, Izuku tore off the blindfold. He faced the onlookers once more. Something like approval had softened into Bashir's frown. Silent pride sparkled in Lin's eyes. He already had a double thumbs up from Tula. And Captain Rhea Sloane simply nodded once, sharply. She remarked, not bad, maybe the infamous kid has lungs worth using after all. Izuku's damp clothes clung to his skin as he walked through the streets of Orlis, the echo of the bell still echoing in his bones. The terraces were dotted with lanterns that glowed amber in the darkness, their light reflected in the canals that ran through the city like gold veins. The aroma of spiced tea, steamed rice, and grilled fish filled the air. Izuku gave himself a faint, weary smile for the first time since entering this secret world. Tula Gonzalez jumped backward in front of him and said, come on, Chico, as though gravity didn't exist. You passed the first trial blind. That means you get food. Good food. Real Orlis street food. Izuku paused. Is this okay? Aren't I supposed to? Tula dismissed him with a wave. Please. You need fuel before the next trial, and if you pass out, I don't want to be the one explaining it to Kale. She laughed. Besides, it's tradition. First bell, first meal in the city. Locals call it the breath of thanks. They hid beneath a hanging bridge and entered a tiny square with hot food vendors and stone benches. Without hesitation, Tula placed her order. Cups of golden tea with a subtle hint of honey and flowers, grilled river eel skewers, and sweet buns filled with spiced beans. Izuku was still catching his breath as he sat next to her at a little table. "So," said Tula, with a cat-like smile in between mouthfuls, "what's it like to be the notorious Chico that everyone is chatting about? Do you feel famous yet?" Izuku reddened. I didn't ask for any of that. I just wanted to help people." Her eyes glinted as she leaned in. Help people? Or prove the world wrong? Izuku stopped. The sounds of the street around them seemed far away for a moment. He reflected on the years of bullying, the sympathetic looks from teachers, and the burden of being worthless. Both, he mutely acknowledged. Tula nearly fell off the bench as she leaned back and laughed. "I like you, honest. Maybe you're not just a nervous little monk after all." Izuku rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly and said, "Thanks," until he had an idea. "Wait, I can understand you perfectly," he replied. "But I don't speak Spanish, or the other languages you used earlier." Tula spun a glitter marble in her fingers and smiled. "That's the mother tongue, huh? Your breath has meaning once you get to know Hammond. It's life speaking to life, not words. No matter what language you were raised in, anyone who breathes the ripple can hear you." "So, this is how Hammond users always understand each other?" Izuku asked, his eyes widening. "Exacto, Chico," Tula replied with a smirk. "It's like, our hearts are having the conversation first, and our mouths are just catching up." The three adults, Bashir, Lin, and Captain Rhea Sloane, conversed quietly at a larger table beneath the tea stall's awning. With a low, piercing voice, Bashir leaned forward and said, "You see what the council's doing? They doubled the difficulty of the initial trial. Wearing a blindfold. Jets of water. Planks spinning. He would have been a smear at the base of the falls if Kale hadn't drilled him." "They want him to fail publicly," Rhea said, giving a single nod while drinking her tea. "Some members are against a boy who is already notorious on these streets. They feel uneasy about a symbol they didn't select." "He passed." Lin's hands clenched around her cup. Bashir looked at her abruptly and said, "Hardly. What happens if he is broken by the next trial? Or worse, the truth striking him more forcefully than any fall?" Ray's eyebrow went up. "Reality? She won't let me tell him," Bashir said in a more resentful and accusing tone. "Regarding Japan. Almost everything for one. Concerning Destro. Concerning the hunters who pursue our species while the rest of the world ignores them." "He's not ready," Lin said, his eyes hard but hurt. "Fear will consume him if he brings that burden into the second trial. To proceed, he needs hope." "Wishes? I hope it doesn't stop bullets," Bashir hissed. "The quirk will still trample us underfoot like weeds despite our hope." With a slow exhale, Rhea released the tension. "Enough. The boy made it through the bell. The council will keep an eye on his next moves. We'll find out soon enough if Kale's attachment is a coincidence or a miracle." With a wink, Tula caught a glittering marble that she had thrown across the plaza. "Ready to see if your lungs are capable of more than just keeping you from falling? So, Chico," she said, bending across the table toward Izuku. Uncertain whether she was referring to the next trial or the weight of everything he hadn't yet been told, Izuku gripped the warm teacup tighter. Tula twirled a bright green spray can between her fingers like a magician with a coin, and after the meal, she led Izuku down a quieter canal path. Lantern light flickering off the water, the night filled with the faint scent of incense and wet stone. "So, Chico," she smiled, "I'll tell you a secret because you saved my life." Izuku cocked his head and said, "A secret?" With ease, Tula leapt onto the stone railing's edge. She flicked the spray can and tapped her chest, saying, "But me? Most people think Hammond is all punches and healing and fancy footwork. I transform it into mischief and art." With a flourish, she showed. A single spray paint burst into the air, followed by a Hammond pulse through her hand, and the paint hung in the air, glowing faintly before dispersing in a harmless puff. The paint shimmered like liquid light. Izuku's mouth fell open. That's incredible. All right. I can charge with Hammond anything that sprays or bursts, like water guns, paintball pistols, or spray cans," she said, taking a small paintball gun out of her hip holster and spinning it on her finger. "Causes a limb to become numb from the water shock or the paint to stick to anything. Even glitter bombs. Lovely and useful." Squeezing the trigger, she aimed the paintball gun at a nearby wooden post, causing a bright pink paintball to splash against it. The paint then adhered to the post like glue, pulsing faintly for a few seconds before fading due to the Hammond pulse. Tula boasted, "Non-lethal, flashy, and demoralizing, plus, super fun at parties." Izuku paused after laughing, saying, "Kale always said Hammond should be used for life and healing." With a shrug, Tula landed lightly on the path and said, "Life is healing. Joy, however, is also life. Joy can also occasionally involve making your enemies look bad with neon pink glitter that they won't be able to remove for a week." She gave him a small paintball pistol, barely bigger than his palm, with a small clip of multicolored rounds after reaching into her belt pouch. She pressed it into his hand and said, "Here, thank you, Chico, for saving my life. Think of this as the beginning of having fun with Hammond." After blinking at the present, Izuku bowed slightly and said, "Thank you, I'll find a solution." "Good," Tula winked, "because you're learning glitter bomb tag the next time we train together." Away from the lantern-lit terraces of Orlis, the trail to the second trial wound deeper into the cliffs, and the sound of the river grew quieter as the mountain wind took its place. With a smile on her face, Tula walked backwards in front of Izuku, balancing easily on the narrow path, her braid bouncing. "This is where I tap out, Chico," she said, drawing her paintball gun one final time. "Healing trials are boring," Ria says. "They're frightening," I say. "But good luck. The next time I see you, I anticipate at least 3 glitter kills, so keep the pistol." Izuku received a single, pointed nod from Captain Ria Sloane, who said, "We'll see if Kale's gamble was worthwhile after you make it through the next trial, boy. Avoid making a fool of yourself." Suddenly, Izuku was left alone with Bashir and Lin as Tula and her master disappeared down a different route. Izuku stopped short as the path opened into a quiet grove. The air had an odd feeling. The earth was dry and dead, as though the world had just stopped breathing here, and even the distant hum of Orliza's energy felt muted. The grove was a cemetery of trees, their bark ashen and cracked, their leaves crumbling to dust at the slightest breeze. "A forest this dead, I've only seen this in abandoned zones near cities," Lin said, his face tightening. "Quirk pollution." "Easy task," Bashir said, crossing his arms. "Inject vitality into what remains. Revive a few trees. After that, we proceed." Izuku knelt at the base of the largest tree, pressing his hands against its dry roots, and nodded, although a slight uneasiness sank into his stomach. Inhaling deeply, he visualized the roots consuming water, the leaves unfolding toward the sun, and life returning in slow, steady waves as Hammond stirred inside him and flowed into the earth. Life follows the breath. In, hold on, out. Initially, nothing occurred. Then, softly, a pulse responded from under the ground, deep and slow like a heartbeat. My eyes grew wide, and Izuku said, "Something's alive under here." "What are you talking about?" scowled Bashir. "Reviving the trees was our directive." Izuku whispered, "I sense something beyond roots." The earth shook softly, and a cracked section of roots shifted, revealing a faintly glowing shell the size of a large melon, and he pushed his Hammond deeper, following that hidden pulse, his senses filling with the echo of something gentle and ancient. Lin gasped, "By the breath of the ancients, a Hammond turtle egg." "The council concealed this," Bashir muttered. "The trial briefing did not include this information." Izuku gazed in wonder and fear, the shell pulsing softly, each beat synchronized with his own respiration. "It's weak," he murmured. "It's trying to breathe, but it's suffocating." "Izuku, this is a sacred creature," Lin said, kneeling next to him with trembling hands. "The council won't if it dies. They will never be able to reject you if it survives." "Then you'd better make it live, boy," Bashir said, his jaw clenched. "No errors, without hesitation." Izuku closed his eyes and put both hands on the egg. The world shrank to heartbeat and breath. The energy surged like a tide, seeking the spark within the egg, and he pushed Hammond into the roots and shell, drawing life from the air, the residual moisture from the misty cliffs, the distant pulse of Orlis itself. The shell was heavy, cold, and lifeless, and at first there was only resistance. Then, faintly, he sensed it, a tiny pulse of life, a weak rhythm, attempting to respond to his call. Izuku breathed deeply, sweat trickled down his brow, and he pictured water seeping through earthen fissures, light penetrating dense clouds, a newborn's first breath. The dead trees trembled around him, faint green veins running along their bark as though life itself were slowly making a comeback. The surface of the egg was warm beneath his palms, and it glowed dimly. Behind him, Bashir's voice rumbled softly, "Impossible, he's sinking with it. He is supplying it with his own breath." Awe softening her voice, Lin muttered a prayer, "If he succeeds, the council won't just have to accept him, they'll fear him." With his palms pressed against the warm shell, Izuku breathed steadily and slowly, pushing Hammond into the egg with each exhale, like a wave of life looking for a spark to respond to. Inside, he sensed a tiny, tentative pulse. He trembled as he whispered, "You're scared," but he continued, "I know that feeling." The grove was quiet except for the slight rustle of leaves starting to stir, and Bashir and Lin remained silent. Izuku went on, his voice breaking, "I know what it's like to be forgotten, to feel as though the world had already decided you weren't important before you had a chance. Although I was surrounded by people, nobody really noticed me, nobody wanted me." The faint pulse of the egg made the roots beneath him tremble. His hamon surged brighter, golden light flickering faintly through his veins and into the shell, and Izuku's breath deepened. "However, I discovered how to breathe. To survive anyhow. Even when I was by myself, to find strength in each step. And I'll tell you about that. You will never have to be alone again if you take my breath. We're going to live together." The world appeared to stop for a heartbeat, then his pulse matched that of the egg. Grass grew from earthen crevices, the withered trees trembled and sprouted new leaves, faint green veins racing along their branches, and a wave of hamon energy exploded outward, rippling through the grove like sunlight piercing storm clouds. Protecting his eyes, Bashir said, "By the breath." A tiny turtle slowly arose, its shell faintly glowing with golden patterns, its eyes reflecting the same soft light as Izuku's hamon, and the egg glowed brilliantly before cracking with a high, clear sound like breaking ice. It chirped weakly and curiously, and the whole grove breathed as though it had been born again. Slumping forward, Izuku grinned and wept, saying, "Hey there, welcome to the world." After blinking, the hamon turtle nuzzled his hand, sending a tiny shiver of warmth up his arm as a thank you. Incredulous, Lin murmured behind him, "He didn't just awaken it, he shared his soul." The harsh, respectful tone of Bashir's voice said, "Kale's boy might be the storm the council feared after all." The emptiness in Izuku's chest felt lighter for the first time in years as he sat beneath the recently resurrected tree, breathing in time with the small turtle, their pulses now one. As he walked back toward the arena, Izuku held the small hamon turtle in his arms, its patterned shell casting a gentle glow on his hands, which were wet and covered in dirt. The turtle's faint pulse beat in time with his own, each beat a whisper of connection. Lin and Bashir spoke in low, urgent voices behind him. On his first healing trial, Bashir mumbled, "They'll never ignore him after this, a harmonic creature he had awakened. He will be considered a prodigy by half of the council. The other half." Lin concluded softly, focusing on Izuku's tiny smile as he caressed the turtle's shell, "Will see him as a threat. The boy is everything they fear. A quirkless child who makes the impossible look effortless." With clenched hands, Bashir said, "Effortless? He put his soul in danger. You witnessed it. He gave that egg to himself. The council will take action if they believe he can influence the next generation." Lin stated plainly, "Then we'll stand with him." Without acknowledging or disagreeing, Bashir grunted. A thin man in deep green robes was waiting for them when they returned to the outskirts of Orlis, with small satchels clinking with glass jars of powders and herbs and a staff carved with crane and turtle motifs. Whispered, the harmonic creature expert, Lin. In a voice like wind through reeds, the man knelt, bowed briefly to the turtle, and then studied Izuku with quiet intensity. "It shows you," he said, "rare, but not unheard of. Channeling hamon is as natural to some animals as breathing. They are able to do things that we cannot. They perceive realities we overlook. Where we break, they survive." Izuku listened carefully and nodded, saying, "Like, it knew what I felt." "Yes," the specialist replied, "harmonic animals imitate their mates. Its breath was your pain. Treat this bond as sacred," he said, lightly touching the turtle's shell. "Your breath became its life. As much as you teach it, it will teach you." Izuku, with the turtle nestled against his chest, took a seat in a small guest room in Orlis that night. He could see lanterns floating down the canals through the paper windows, and he could hear the distant ring of a ceremonial bell. The council assembled in the darkened room across the city, their murmurs piercing and polarizing. The boy revived an entire grove. A harmonic creature was roused by him. Kale's pet poses a threat. Or destined. He could divide us. The whispers were silenced when the elder in the top seat tapped his staff against the ground, saying, "We will know his heart before he finishes the trials." Totally. A faint but ominous shadow moved through the room, suggesting a covert trial, a mental and loyalty test, where he would not be saved by his breath alone. Izuku closed his eyes and thought about the small turtle's constant warmth against his chest as he drifted off to sleep. There would be fighting tomorrow, along with something he couldn't yet identify. It was too warm in the world. Izuku felt as though he was half asleep, Kamiko's tiny pulse echoing faintly in his chest as he floated in golden light, his body weightless, his lungs heavy. Where am I? His voice was a whisper that the light ate up. 5 figures with recognizable faces and shapes arose from the mist. All Might. Imposing and brilliant, but surrounded by shadows. Bakugo with his arms folded in a glare that could cut. His mother, Inko Midoriya, with her hands clasped and a worried expression on her gentle face. Unreadable and silent, Kale's cloak rustled like a sigh. Shigaraki Tamura, with his pale face contorted with mocking amusement, was crouching low and flexing his hand. Izuku felt a knot in his stomach. What is this? This is the breath under your breath. All dreams are choices. Kale's voice resounded, layered and far away. The world will listen if you speak. Bakugo was the first to sneer. Now what, Deku? Do you believe that you will become a hero by assisting these Hammon freaks? Without your breathing tricks and toys, you can't even fight. You're still that worthless quirkless whiner in your heart. Izuku winced but clenched his fists, saying, I'm no longer useless. I assist others in my own way. With a low, cracked rasp, Shigaraki laughed. Your manner? Do you believe that saving strays and scraps makes a difference? Children like you are unimportant to the world. It won't. One hand like mine is all that is required, and the golden floor beneath him cracked to dust as he flexed his fingers. I know the world is cruel, Izuku said, trembling but remaining upright. But it wins if I stop breathing. I refuse to allow it. With shadowed eyes, All Might stepped forward. And young Midoriya, what about bravery? In the shadows, can you be a hero? Can you serve this hidden society and turn your back on the world to save it? Izuku's throat grew constricted. I can heal the world and save it, by refusing to be a hero. I'll remain in the background if that's what it takes. I will make myself smile. The warmth of the air was broken by Inko's voice. Why do you always pick pain, baby? Why are you unable to simply return home? I only want you to live, so why do you constantly put yourself in danger? Izuku's eyes burned with tears. Because someone else will suffer just as much as I will if I don't. Mom, I can't just watch. I am unable to. Kale finally spoke, his tone gentle but steely. So, Izuku Midoriya, respond to this for me. Who will you save when the blood and the breath meet? The family that ultimately welcomed you, or the world that turned you away? Izuku felt his pulse thunder in his ears and his chest tighten as the light pressed in. He took a deep, trembling breath and muttered. I'll keep both. I'll save both even if it means burning my lungs out. Izuku plunged into darkness as the world broke into golden fragments. Hours later, he woke up in the guest room with Kamiko sleeping on his chest, his memory hazy, his head hurting, and his heart heavy. Did you dream about that? Above the city, the council's observers nodded silently to one another. One whispered, the boy's heart has been weighed. Then the combat trial will show the rest, someone else said. Izuku remained motionless for a moment, just breathing as the sun's rays traced warm patterns across the tatami floor through the paper windows of his guest room. On his chest lay the soft weight of the harmonic turtle, its shell glowing dimly in the early morning light, each of its tiny breaths rising and falling in perfect time with his own. Izuku muttered, morning, her voice still squeaky from sleep. He was still troubled by the dream from the previous night, but he dismissed it. The turtle stretched its small legs and tapped his chin with a warm, moist nose before blinking its golden-flecked eyes and making a soft chirp that was in between a squeak and a sigh. I suppose that means you're hungry, Izuku said with a laugh. Gently he placed the turtle on the floor, and it waddled toward a bowl of water and sliced fruit that Lin had left overnight, leaving faint golden rings behind as it drank, soft ripples of Hammon shimmering across the water's surface. Izuku sat cross-legged and watched, sensing the connection now. A subtle undercurrent of emotion in addition to the shared breath. Loneliness. A desire for warmth. A tenacious determination to survive. I know exactly how you feel, he whispered. The turtle touched it with its little nose, and he held out a finger, allowing Hammon to flow to the tip, and a soft ripple of warmth flowed between them. Acknowledgement, trust, and silent delight. I think I'll call you Kamiko, Izuku said with a slight smile, tiny turtle. The turtle gave a single, seemingly appraising chirp. The combat trial gathering was announced by the double ringing of Orelai's bell tower outside. All right, Kamiko, time to show them we can fight, too. Izuku took a deep breath, allowing the air to fill his chest and calm his nerves. Far from the city's graceful terraces, Orelai's battleground was carved into a hollowed cavern beneath the cliffs, its walls damp with condensation, its iron gates and chains set into the rock, lanterns flickering, the shadows long and uneven. Kamiko sat quietly on Izuku's shoulder as he entered, and I could feel the anticipation in the air. The crowd was smaller than at the first trial, but the energy was more dangerous, sharper. Bashir and Lin stood across the circular arena with several council members, their cloaks like shadowed wings, while other Hammon users filled the stands above, muttering in anticipation. Like a hammer on stone, Bashir's voice reverberated. Izuku Midoriya. Your first trial put your breath and balance to the test. Your life and your heart were put to the test in your second. Your ability to fight and survive will be put to the test on this third. Bashir's voice trailed off as the iron gates creaked open. Face the three shadows of our history. The first figure entered the arena, a slender Hammon warrior with a solitary braid on his shaved head, a simple tunic, but a ripple-forged spear gleamed in his hands, humming with faint energy, and his movements were deliberate and controlled like flowing water. Hammon versus Hammon, he will test your discipline, Bashir said, student versus warrior. Silently, the man bowed, and Izuku returned it, his heart pounding. The temperature appeared to drop as the second gate moaned open. The vampire hissed, a savage sound that reverberated off the cavern walls, and a figure appeared behind a cage in the shadows, its skin pale and stretched, its eyes glowing faintly red, its fangs gleaming in the lamplight, its black veins pulsing along its hands. In a quiet, almost respectful tone, Lin said, a reminder of our first duty, to push back the darkness. To defend the world against evil that preyed on the weak. With its breath hissing like steam, the vampire squatted low, its claws scraping the stone floor. Izuku swallowed hard, his hands shaking at the sight of one alive, knowing that it was blood-hungry, even though he had studied theory about such creatures in his Hammon training. The atmosphere changed from ancient dread to something more human, and worse, when the third gate opened. A man was hauled into the arena with a metal collar fastened around his neck, his hair wild and greasy, his grin a jagged thing that didn't reach his fever-bright eyes, and chains rattling. Uncomfortable silence replaced the whispers in the stands. This, Bashir declared in an iron-voiced voice, is a human monster. In the outer cities, a quirk user was apprehended. He is strong and quick due to his ability, but his obsession is his real crime. I like the little ones, he said in a gravelly, low voice, tilting his head toward Izuku and licking his teeth. The weak ones. The ones without quirks. They run amusingly. Izuku's fists shook, his stomach knotted, a cold fire ignited in his chest, and for a moment, the memory of his helplessness as a child burned behind his eyes. Sharp but composed, Lin's voice reverberated throughout the arena. He is the reason we hide. The reason we fight. Why a world that claims to be safe still needs Hammon. As he tested the length of the chains, the man laughed and said, I'm going to make him scream before they pull me back. The arena echoed with the thunder of Bashir's voice. 3 enemies. Just one trial. Inhale or perish. Prove to the council that the boy they are afraid of is the one they need as a fighter. Izuku shut his eyes. Hold. Out. In. His Hammon hummed to life, filling his body with warm resolve, and for a moment, Kamiko's gentle pulse against his neck caused his fear to melt into focus. The gong made a sound. It was the start of the combat trial. The arena was thick with anticipation and mist as the gong's echo diminished. The man's ripple-forged spear hummed faintly with restrained energy, a thread of gold dancing along its tip, and Izuku and the Hammon warrior circled one another, bare feet sliding across the slippery stone floor. The warrior calmly remarked, your breath, not strength, will determine this. Don't be afraid. Izuku took a deep breath, centered himself, and lowered himself into the low position that Kale had taught him, in, hold, out. Izuku ducked as the warrior moved first, his Hammon pulsing to his legs for speed, and the spear tip whistled past his shoulder in a lunge so smooth it felt like water cutting through air. Clack. The warrior shifted his step as Izuku's foot struck damp stone, sending a ripple pulse through a thin sheet of water, allowing Izuku to sprint forward and graze the man's arm with a palm strike infused with Hammon. The warrior's lips formed a small smile and said, not bad. His aura changed then. Izuku felt it before it touched him, a pressure in the air like a wave about to crash, and the next swing of the spear hummed louder, repel. Wham! His Hammon instinctively tried to lessen the impact, but the force threw him across the arena as the spear's shaft brushed off Izuku's ribs and the repel surge exploded through his body. A crash. Izuku slammed into the wet cavern wall, his teeth rattling and his breath taken away, and he crumpled to one knee, gasping as the impact caused white-hot pain along his shoulder and back. A whisper echoed through the bleachers. Inhale. From above, Bashir yelled, you lose your fight if you can't breathe. Kamiko on the observation ledge outside the ring gave him a soft, echoing pulse of assurance as Izuku clenched his jaw and forced air into his lungs. In. Hold. Out. With a calm but respectful tone, the warrior twirled his spear and said, "Good. You are able to take a hit. Show me now if you can respond to one." He ducked behind a fallen pillar for a moment, then rolled out, firing a charged orange round as Izuku's paintball pistol slid into his hand, warm with Hammon. Oh no! Izuku took advantage of the moment when the warrior's hold wavered, charging, feinting low, then leaping high, delivering a ripple kick to the man's shoulder as the paintball splattered against the spear shaft, causing Hammon to ripple along its length. The warrior was stunned by the impact and chuckled softly as he stabbed the ground with his spear. Enough. You've demonstrated your will and your lungs. The first phase came to an end when the gong sounded. Even though Izuku's shoulder throbbed and his ribs hurt, he maintained a firm stance and steady breathing. I took a hit like a real fighter, Bashir said, crossing his arms and narrowing his eyes. But that's just the beginning. Let's test your ability to breathe in the dark. The vampire's eyes glowed red in the darkness, and a low hiss sliced through the cavern air from the second gate. There was a chilling silence as the gong's echo subsided. With one hand raised toward the stands, Bashir said, "Shroud the arena." Golden lines of ripple energy arced through the air, weaving together until a translucent dome sealed the arena in shadow, and 4 Hammon users in ceremonial robes extended their palms toward the iron ring above the arena with a single, unified exhale. While the arena floor descended into a chilly, gloomy twilight, the stands above continued to receive sunlight, the warm rays halting just short of the edge of the dome. Izuku felt the change in the air, the dampness of stone, the slight metallic tang of water in the darkness, and his skin prickled. In controlled darkness, where only breath and light could guide the strike, Lin whispered to a nearby council member, "This is how our ancestors fought them." A low, throaty hiss rolled into the dome from the second gate. Its eyes glowed faint crimson, its fanged grin split its face in two, its long fingers flexed, claws scraping the damp stone floor, and the vampire came out, hunched and stalking, its skin pale and stretched taut against muscle. The sight was enough to frighten even the most seasoned Hammon users, and gasps and whispers echoed through the stands. Despite the pounding in his heart, Izuku planted his feet and took a deep breath, allowing Hammon to warm his heart. In. Hold. Out. With its voice like rust and smoke, the vampire hissed, quirkless, warm blood, soft heart, as it sniffed the air and twitched his head in his direction. Izuku winced, but remained in his position. It's exactly as Kale taught me. Breathe first, then worry. In a flash, the creature was gone. When instinct cried out, Izuku dropped into a roll, Hammon pulsing through his hands to grasp the slippery stone, just as he had caught the movement, a ripple of cold wind and the echo of claws. Scrotch. Claws left long gouges in the floor where his head had been a heartbeat before. Izuku reflexively fired Tula's paintball pistol as the vampire's head lunged toward him, too quickly and sharply. Oh no! Smoke hissed from the wound, and the vampire shrieked, reeling back as the ripple sizzled against its skin like acid, the paintball charged by Hammon splattering across its chest. Shouts and cheers came from the stands, and Bashir's harsh but approving voice broke through them. Well done. Keep the breath's purpose in mind. Darkness is destroyed by light. Izuku's heart pounded as he made his way around the arena, sensing the predator's presence in the shadows and the subtle, coppery tang of blood. Pressing his palm against the damp stone, he sent a Hammon ripple across the floor, feeling the vampire clinging to the wall above, waiting to jump, the tiny pulses bouncing back, echoing shapes in his mind. Izuku muttered, "Not this time." The vampire screamed and fell to the ground, confused, as he leapt and shot 2 more paintballs in rapid succession, both of which exploded with light charged with Hammon and spattered the wall. With his foot planted on the wet stone, Izuku slid in low and channeled Hammon into a ripple kick, sending golden sparks flying as his heel struck the vampire's jaw. Izuku felt a strong surge of instinctive fear as the creature stumbled and screamed, reminding him that this was a living predator that wanted him dead. I am the wave. I do not fall. In. Hold. Out. With Hammon rushing through his arm, he aimed the paintball pistol at the vampire's heart and fired the last shot. The ripple passed through the creature's chest, and the paintball exploded with a burning pulse, causing the vampire to convulse and collapse, causing smoke to rise from its skin as the energy destroyed its unnatural life. The vampire's body turned to dust and strewn across the damp floor as the dome disintegrated and sunlight spilled into the arena. Izuku was trembling and his chest was heaving, but he was anchored by Kamiko's slight pulse in his chest, which kept his breathing steady. The voice of Bashir echoed, "There are two shadows below. There is still one. The worst of all of them." A low, human laugh crept across the cavern floor as the third gate started to rise, chains rattling. With his greasy hair falling over his sharp, fever-bright eyes, the serial killer slouched into the arena as the iron gate clanged open, his chains clinking softly with every step. The boy experienced a surge of old fear as his eyes locked with Izuku's. "You," the man said, smiling, "you're a quirkless person. Gentle, similar to the ones I like. I can already hear the cracking of your bones." Izuku's ribs ached slightly from the previous battle, and his hands gripped his Hammond scarf tighter. "I have previously been here." He was reminded of USJ, of Tamura Shigaraki's decay tearing through flesh and steel, of the helplessness he felt for the first time when confronted with actual malice. His combat rhythm was raw, he was able to heal and defend, and his Hammond was reactive and raw back then. He survived USJ by instinct and good fortune. Due to external circumstances, that fight ended in a draw. This one must be completed. The murderer flexed his fingers, causing spiderweb cracks to bloom out from his touch as he dragged one hand along the wall, his quirk, splinter touch, crackling faintly, tiny fractures rippling along his knuckles. "You believe Hammond will come to your rescue? I am aware of your little trick," he said, his voice slithering with sly glee. "Power of breath. You're just a scared child again if you cut off your air supply, bleed yourself dry, or prevent yourself from coming into contact with anything that conducts it." Izuku's stomach sank when he realized he truly understood Hammond. Izuku rolled sideways, scarf whipping out to block the swipe as the man lunged, his chains jingling as he blurred forward faster than any untrained eye could follow. Crack. Splinter touch fractures bloomed beneath the skin, hot and sharp, and pain rushed through his forearm where the chain had brushed him. The murderer laughed and said, "I don't have to cut. All I need is a touch. You're broken from the inside out after just one tap." Hammond rippled into the moss and crevices as Izuku planted his palms on the damp stone, and thin green shoots grew and curled across the floor. With a flick of his fingers, the murderer cracked each vine as he stomped forward. "Roots. Adorable. You're bleeding now, though. How long can you continue breathing even though your lungs hurt?" Izuku allowed his breath to guide him despite his racing heart. In, hold, out. He went into attack mode, pulsing Hammond into the moss and snapping his scarf around the man's leg. The moss snaked up the killer's leg, and the scarf sparked with ripple energy, trapping him for a moment. "Got you," whispered Izuku. However, the murderer smiled and said, "Got you too." A few shards of stone sliced Izuku's cheek and arms, and one of them stuck him in his thigh, sending warm blood streaking down. He slammed his free hand onto the stone, and splinter-touched spiderwebs sped through the floor, breaking the roots and sending sharp fragments flying. His focus faltered for a moment, and his Hammond flickered. Losing blood, needing air, and requiring a conductor. If I make a mistake, he can actually counter me. Kamiko felt a slight pulsation against his chest. Izuku let out a breath that made his veins calm. "I can survive you because I've been cornered before and I survived Shigaraki." In order to channel ripple energy in a looping circuit, he snatched up the paintball pistol, charged it with Hammond, and fired at the wet wall behind the murderer. The ball burst into a bright splash of conductive paint, and Izuku slashed his scarf through it. Izuku held nothing back this time, and the scarf snapped across the murderer's back like a Hammond whip, pushing him forward into a second pulse of roots and moss that sprang from the damp crevices. Izuku fired a final charged paintball into the floor at his feet, while the scarf wound around his arms and chest and the roots wrapped around his legs. Hammond surged through every conductor, scarf, moss, water, and chains, like a tidal wave, causing the entire arena to pulse golden for a heartbeat. The serial killer screamed, his body trembling as the ripple stripped him of his strength, and then he fell to the ground, breathing but restrained, his body held in place by the scarf and moss. Izuku stumbled, his shoulder hurting, his breath coming in short gasps, but he remained upright. The gong made a heavy, final sound. The voice of Bashir boomed. "All 3 trials are finished. The boy is still breathing." The murmurs started high in the shadowed balcony of the council. "He adapts faster than any novice we've seen. He knows pain, and turns it into strength, and yet, he is dangerous." Izuku knew this was not the end as he looked down at his shaking hands and felt Kamiko's gentle pulse reverberating through him. Oraliza's bells echoed through the canals and against the cliffs as they rang across the terraces. Lanterns bobbed on the water, Families crowded along the balcony rails to see the boy who had made it through the 3 trials, and Izuku stood in the middle plaza, the city ablaze with light and sound. Despite his shoulder throbbing from the serial killer's splintered touch and his body aching from bruises, he stood tall with Kamiko perched on his shoulder. Over the assembled crowd, Bashir's voice could be heard. All 3 trials are finished. Equilibrium. Restoring. Fight. The boy breathes, and now our people's breath may be in him. Cheers and whispers filled the plaza, children pointed, elders whispered, and some faces lit up with suspicion and others with hope. As Lin stepped forward to drape the ceremonial scarf over Izuku's shoulders, he felt heat rise to his cheeks, its threads pulsing softly in time with his breath and embedded with tiny, living veins of Hammon energy. "You are of Orlus from this day on," Lin stated in a quiet yet distinct voice. "I hope your breath brings light and life." Softly, the crowd chanted, "Inhale. Live, keep safe." Then the world began to tilt. Izuku dropped to his knees, his hands gripping the scarf as the plaza vanished into golden light. No, not right now. One by one, the figures reappeared in the haze. All Might, shadowed eyes. Bakugo, sneering and with his arms crossed. Inko, quivering with both love and fear. Kale, as sharp as a blade and unreadable. Shigaraki Tamura, squatting, smiling as if he were privy to a secret. Whispers reverberated from every nook and cranny of his mind as their voices overlapped. Bakugo. Deku, do you still feel like you belong somewhere? All Might. Are you going to give up everything to save this city? Inko says, "Come home, Izuku, please," Shigaraki said. "No matter how much you breathe, the world will choke you out." Kale. Make a decision. Blood or breath, world or family. The weight of choice crushed Izuku, and the light pressed in, burning his lungs. However, he didn't look away or whisper this time. His voice cracked as he said, staring them in the eyes. "I'll keep both of them. Regardless of the cost or the extent of the pain. I'll keep both of them." It broke the golden light. The city cheered, and to them, nothing odd had happened, and Izuku blinked and was back in the plaza, kneeling with the scarf still warm around his shoulders. However, the cloaked elders looked at each other, one leaning toward the other high on the council balcony. "He passed the breath of heart. He is dangerous, but he is ours now." Izuku, who had no recollection of falling but only the echo of golden whispers in his chest, stood slowly, lifted Kamiko to his shoulder, and forced a smile for the audience. Celebration throughout the city. Like ripples of golden sound, the tones of the Orlus bells echoed down the cliffs. The city stretched out like a living tapestry from the central plaza where Izuku knelt, with lanterns bobbling along the canals and banners of flowing cloth dyed in the deep green and gold of Hammon's crest, their reflections glimmering on the water like fireflies. It was as if the whole city was breathing in time with him. Bashir's voice boomed, firm and proud, "Rise, Midoriya Izuku, you have taken our people's breath away. The river of Orlus and the wind will bear your name from now on." Kamiko sat on Izuku's shoulder as he stood unsteadily, the ceremonial scarf pulsing in time with his heart and glowing faintly with his Hammon. From the terraces came a cacophony of whistles and cheers. Petals were thrown into the canals by children. The rhythm of the merchants' drumming and pot banging reverberated throughout the plaza like a heartbeat. Lanterns ascended into the night sky, moving toward the stars on the cliffside like tiny suns. Amidst the throng, Tula emerged, leaping up onto a railing and putting her hands over her mouth. "Eso, Shiko. My brave and glittery hero." Izuku couldn't help but laugh, his cheeks burning with embarrassment and pride. The festivities spread out over the terraces. Bamboo flutes and hand drums were played by musicians, whose notes twisted through the night air. Dancers wearing painted masks and flowing scarves imitated the pulse of Hammon and the ripple of rivers. Food was distributed from neighbor to neighbor in floating trays, including steamed buns, honeyed tea, and river fish skewers. As Izuku stopped to greet families who reached out to touch Kamiko's shell or the scarf, he was carried away by the wave of happiness. At his side, Lin whispered, "This is what it means to be part of us," as the lanterns illuminated her face. Izuku noticed the tiniest glimmer of approval in Bashir's eyes as he stood behind her, arms crossed, his face as stern as ever. The grand breath marked the end of the night, when the whole city took a single breath, holding the air in silent awe, and then exhaled into the crisp mountain night. For a single heartbeat, Izuku felt as though he was a part of something greater than himself, a world that at last desired him, as the lanterns flickered brighter and the water shimmered gold. However, he experienced a slight, lingering uneasiness as the applause swept over him. The voices from the Golden Dream continued to reverberate in his mind. Family or the world? Blood or breath? The shadow of the secret trial hung in his chest, but he let out a slow breath and let the city carry him. Lanterns floated across the canals, fireworks of Hammond light danced along the terraces, and the roar of music and cheers rolled up the cliffs like thunder as the celebration in Orlis glowed under the night sky like a river of gold. Kale watched silently from a far-off ridge above the city, his dark cloak billowing in the chilly mountain wind, his eyes, sharp and reflective, following Izuku Midoriya as he stood in the plaza, his scarf glowing softly as he greeted the cheering citizens. "He really did it," Kale said in a low voice, a mixture of fear and pride. "Pride suits you poorly, Kale," a voice who was behind him said. From the ridge's shadows came two figures, both in gold-trimmed council cloaks. Elder Mahari, the one for Izuku, was a tall man with warm brown eyes and a voice like weathered stone. The flowing wave patterns carved into his staff represented adaptation and continuity. Elder Isolde, the one who opposed Izuku, was a sharp-featured woman with silver hair braided down her back. Her staff was tipped with a shard of obsidian, and her eyes gleamed like cold glass. "You both came to gloat, or to scold?" Kale asked without turning to greet them. "Neither," Mahari calmly replied, "just to see the effects of what you have let loose." As Tula threw glitter bombs into the air, glittering like miniature fireworks, children cheered and adults reached for the ceremonial scarf to touch its dim glow, and Izuku laughed shyly below. Mahari whispered, "Look at them. The boy has accomplished more in 3 days than most initiates do in 3 years. Life itself has been resurrected, fought, and healed by him. He was even picked by the harmonic turtle. He is carrying Hammond's future in his lungs." "He carries danger," Mahari, Isolde said, his lips pressed thin, "and catastrophe. People may applaud now, but they fail to see what I do. A foundational crack. He is not a native. A boy from the quirked world, with their softness and habits." "Softness is not weakness," Kale said, his jaw clenched. "His heart, not just his lungs, is what gives him strength." "Heart? When the world above comes for him, heart won't save him," Isolde said, his eyes glimmering. "Without a doubt, Kale, your boy has made our walls a target. All for One continues to hunt. Destro's philosophy rots. The council must now discuss whether the risk is worth it for this child." Mahari took a step toward the edge of the ridge, staring at Izuku's glowing scarf. "The political fallout has already begun," he said softly, adding, "Half the council calls for celebration. For the other half, containment is necessary. To protect Orlis, there are rumors that he should be sent away as a foreign agent." Under his cloak, Kale's fists clenched. "They will regret it if they try to exile him." "Then perhaps your heart is the real weakness here, Kale," Isolde said with a chilly, thin smile. Unaware of the storm that was building in the shadows above him, Izuku raised Kamiko and waved to a group of children as the wind shifted, carrying the faint ringing of the city bells and the distant roar of the crowd. At last the city of Orlis had become silent. Most of the people had gone to their houses, but the sound of laughter and music still echoed in the air, and the only sounds in the night were the faint pulse of his own breathing and the gentle hum of the river. Lanterns continued to drift across the canals, creating ripples of golden light along the stone walls. Kamiko curled on Izuku's lap, its tiny heartbeat a constant source of comfort as he sat on his guest room balcony. He felt like he belonged for the first time in his life. A gentle smile tugged at his lips as he gazed out over the city that had embraced him, tried him, and supported him. In a whisper, he stroked Kamiko's shell and said, "So this is what it feels like. To at last have a place where I'm welcome, a place where I can breathe." However, a familiar ache persisted beneath the warmth that had settled in his chest. The world above flooded back to him as he recalled the faces from his dream. Bakugo's frown, his mother's quivering smile, and All Might's shadowed eyes. Weak or quirkless kids are still ignored and bullied. Communities that are oppressed by corruption and crime. Individuals who wait in alleys for the weak are similar to serial killers. He gripped the scarf around his shoulders more tightly. "What about them? I can remain here." With a slow exhale, he watched the cloud of his breath dissipate into the mountain air. He whispered, "I want to save people," a statement intended only for himself and the river below. With a smile, "I wish to save them. My grin. The Hammond way, in my opinion, our manner." As though in agreement, Kamiko nuzzled his arm and chirped softly. The questions in his heart, however, remained. If I return, my internship will end in just 1 week, but what will happen after that? Do I fight from the shadows, or do I go back to the world above? Or should I remain here and hope that someone else bears the burden I've been carrying? There was no response from the night, just the soft throb of Orlus, as if the city itself were breathing with him. For the moment, Izuku let the mountain wind cool his face as he leaned back against the railing. But he knew in his heart, his tale was only getting started. As the morning sun glinted off the carvings that resembled tides, the stone walls of the council hall hummed with the sound of distant waterfalls. In an attempt to conceal his nervousness, Izuku knelt in the middle. Elder Haru said, "Midoriya Izuku," in a steady yet resonant voice. "Today, your journey flows beyond the sanctuary. You will accompany 2 of our own to the island of Kavai." Izuku's heart skipped a beat. It was his first official mission. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice he recognized. "About time they let you out of the nest, Chico Verde." With a broad smile and a jacket covered in paint that jingled with glitter bombs and cartridges, Tula Gonzalez bounded into the hall. She waved to the elders as though they were distant relatives rather than bowing. Saying, "You're lucky," she put an arm around Izuku's shoulder. "I already called dibs on saving your life if you fall off the boat." Captain Rhea Sloane, tall, scarred, with her sawed-off shotgun slung over one shoulder, stepped in immediately behind her. She nodded once to Izuku. "Kale's boy. Good. You know the rules. Don't freeze, follow orders, and if Tula gets you into trouble, I'm throwing her overboard first." Tula let out a loud gasp. "Mentira," she exclaimed, holding her chest tightly. "You love me too much." Izuku chuckled uneasily. "Well, let's get it, you guys." Sloane said. "Say it with confidence," she said plainly. "Now grab your gear. We've got pirates to deal with." The salt air was crisp in Izuku's lungs as the boat cut through the waves. He was a member of the team this time, not a nervous outsider. Tula threw glittering paintballs into the air while lounging on the deck. "Remember last time? When I slipped and almost fell in the water and you was being a hero, aha?" Izuku let out a groan. "You almost got both of us killed." She smirked and said, "Yeah, but now we're on a mission, more extreme now, aha." Wearing sunglasses, Sloane stood at the helm, her cropped hair catching the sea spray. "Focus up, Gonzalez. We'll hit Kavai in 20 minutes. Seamaster says the pirates have a new ringleader with a water quirk." Izuku gripped the railing tighter. "We're not killing anyone, right?" Sloane's lips quirked. "Not unless they force our hand. Our job is to keep the islanders safe and keep the water calm. Mine specifically is to make sure you both come back alive." Tula smiled. She whirled her paintball gun and said, "And mine is to make it look fabulous. Can't stop the ripple, Chico." A faint golden light rippled behind the boat as it hummed over the churning waves, its hull carved by Hammond. Izuku's hand hovered just above the sea as he leaned over the side. The water responded to his breath by pulsing against his fingertips. Jumping from the boat, Kamiko plunged into the sea. A round, green-brown shell appeared next to the boat with a gentle splash. Izuku said, "Hey, Kamiko," with warmth. His first real Hammond friend, the harmonic sea turtle, chirped like a muffled conch and blinked at him with its large, soft eyes. Its shell was dotted with golden ripples, a tangible reflection of his Hammond flow. Tula sat on the railing. Moralo. He's still adorable. You spoil him, Chico." "She's a her," Izuku automatically corrected. "And she's not spoiled, she's part of the team." For a brief moment, Captain Sloane's expression softened as she looked back from the helm. "That turtle is a harmonic animal. Treat her like a comrade, not a pet." With ease, Kamiko swam to keep up, diving beneath the boat and emerging on the opposite side. The bond pulsed in response to Izuku's Hammond reach, a silent assurance that she would follow him into any danger. With waterfalls cascading down into glistening tide pools and emerald peaks rising from the sea, the island of Kavai glistened in the sunlight. Warm salt, distant bird sounds, and the soft hum of life that Izuku could feel in his lungs with each breath made the air alive. Kamiko's golden rippled shell gleamed with every dive and surface as she chirped softly in the water next to the boat. Izuku felt her happiness reverberate through his Hammond bond as he reached down and ran his fingertips across the sea. While casually wiping paint off her goggles, Tula said, "First time seeing Kavai, Chico? You look like a puppy that just found the beach." Izuku chuckled uneasily. "It's amazing. I can feel everything breathing out here." Captain Sloane kept her gaze fixed on the island. "Remember that feeling. That's what you protect when the world gets ugly." A tall figure waited at the end of the dock as it drew closer. A Taiaha staff lay across his broad shoulders as if it were a part of Tane Moana, who stood barefoot on the pier, 6 feet 7 inches of sun-bronzed muscle, with glowing Polynesian tattoos spiraling like waves across his arms and chest, long black hair tied with shells catching the wind, and a shark tooth necklace resting over his heart. When the boat got closer, Tula waved. "Hey Tane. Hermano," gave you a fresh little wave. Like surf on rock, the Sea Master's thunderous laugh rolled across the water. "Gonzalez, Sloan, too, it's time for you to return south." With the assurance of a man who controlled the tide itself, he strode ahead, but he stopped in the middle of his stride, his gaze fixed on the water. "What is that?" Kamiko swam a circle around the boat, creating ripples that glinted in the sunlight, and surfaced with a happy chirp, her shell shining gold with Izuku's hamon. In fact, Tane's mouth fell open. "A sea turtle that's harmonic." Several islanders gasped from the dock as his voice boomed in disbelief. "Little Wave, are you aware of your actions?" Izuku gripped the railing and blinked, saying, what do you mean?" "She is simply Kamiko. During my trial, I assisted her in hatching." Eyes wide as a child seeing the ocean for the first time, Tane fell to one knee on the pier. A guardian of the tide can only form a bond with the purest breaths. I've witnessed manta rays and dolphins respond to hamon. A sea turtle, though. When he put a huge hand on the water, Kamiko swam to meet him, brushed his fingers, and then chirped joyfully at Izuku once more. With a deep, happy laugh that shook the pier, Tane threw back his head. "Hey, little wave, the ocean already adores you. Oh, it's over for the pirates." Smiling slightly, Captain Sloan said, "Told you the kid had potential." Kamiko chirped again, as though enjoying the attention, and Izuku's face burned red, torn between pride and panic. Tane's eyes gleamed as he reached his full, towering height. "Then we battle the sea herself today. Let the ocean see if you can dance, little wave." As they got closer to the rust-streaked silhouette of a single pirate trawler drifting close to the reef, the wind howled against the bow of the boat, its black flag snapping in the wind and the smell of fuel hanging in the air. Tane was crouching at the helm of their smaller craft, his enormous body somehow balanced like a cat, his tattoos rippling golden blue with every breath and glowing faintly in the dawn light. "Just one ship. A scout. Excellent, we'll take it calmly and let the waves do the talking." This was his first real mission beyond trials, and Izuku's heart pounded. He looked at Kamiko, who was swimming just beneath the surface, and he breathed in time with her as she chirped softly, sensing his nerves. Captain Sloan nodded and checked her shotgun. "The plan is easy. I take the wheel. They're blinded by Tula. You breach, Tane. Izuku. Listen to the sea, stay low, and do as he says." At the distant pirates, Tula blew a kiss. They have no idea what's about to hit them. The method: there were 4 pirates on deck, half asleep with rifles slung over their shoulders, and the Hammond boat sailed silently beside the trawler, rusty ladders clanging softly against metal as the sea tossed them. Even though Tane's voice was a whisper, it was heard like a wave. "Small wave. The most significant ripple is always the first one. Are you prepared?" Izuku nodded after swallowing. "Yes, then make the sea our ally." Kamiko reacted immediately, diving beneath the pirate ship, and a moment later the trawler rocked, gentle enough to be ridden off as a wave, but firm enough to knock one pirate off balance. Izuku put his hand in the water, allowing Hammond to pulse outward. 2 pirates were covered in blinding silver powder as Tula's glitter bomb flew through the air and detonated silently on the deck. "Sorpresa." She smiled and hissed. Tane only needed to hear the pirates' confused shouts and coughs. Tane roared as he leapt onto the deck, landing like a falling boulder, his taiaha spinning in a circle, seemingly guided by the water itself, sweeping 2 pirates off their feet with a single motion before turning to block a rifle with the blunt end of the staff. With control and precision, Captain Sloan climbed up behind him and used the stock of her shotgun to crack the jaw of the first surviving pirate. "Stay down." A second pirate brandished a knife, but Izuku extended Hammond through the metal rail, shocking the man's hand with a burning pulse that sent the blade clattering as he scrambled up the ladder, Kamiko emerging behind him with a triumphant chirp. "Well done, tiny wave. You're now a part of the tide," Tane roared. Dual-wielding her paintball pistols, Tula bounded onto the deck and splattered the final pirate with sticky blue paint, causing him to flail and sputter as she tagged him in the chest and helmet. The deck was theirs in less than a minute. Kamiko, her golden shell gleaming in the sunlight, floated close by like a silent sentinel, forcing the pirates to their knees near the mast. With a shark-like smile, Tane knelt before the leader, a scrawny, sunburned man with a quirk-scarred arm. His voice was deep as the ocean floor, but calm. "You've got two choices," he said. "You can speak, or you can swim." "We'll never," the pirate said, spitting seawater from his lips. Tane's tattoos pulsed in time with the sudden swirling of water beneath the trawler, creating a tiny whirlpool that rocked the boat. "Be cautious. The ocean is paying attention." Kamiko gave a low, rumbling chirp, and the pirate's eyes widened as Izuku stood close by, trying to appear braver than he actually felt. "Your turtle is glowing, isn't it?" "That's correct," Izuku muttered, "and she dislikes liars." The pirate broke down. "All right. Dead Reef is where the fleet is. The Black Cliffs are 2 miles to the east. They have a wave rider with them, though, so you can't fight them. He has command over the water." Leaning closer, Tane cast his shadow over the man. "Then the ocean will teach him who it truly belongs to." He looked at Tula and Sloane. "Keep the boat safe. Tell your turtle she did a good job, little wave. The hunt starts." For the first time, Izuku thought the sea was grinning with him as Kamiko chirped with pride. Kamiko bumped her shell against the hull as if celebrating their first mission together, and Izuku sat near the bow, wet from sea spray, as the Hammond boat glided back toward Kavai, the morning sun now high enough to make the water appear like molten sapphire. With his taiaha laid across his back and his eyes searching the horizon, Tane stood at the helm. "Nice little wave, first ripple. However, we are as patient as the ocean. We need to get ready before the tide comes in." "We'll need scouts on Dead Reef," Captain Sloane said with a firm nod. "Before we commit, I want to know every rock, every current, and every way in or out." With a smile, Tane said, "Already done." Islanders were already waiting when they arrived at the wooden pier. Children ran ahead, yelling in the mother tongue, and Kamiko chirped back. Izuku was hesitant to get off the boat because he was anxious to be seen by so many people, but Tane's loud laugh rocked the atmosphere. "Don't get any smaller, little wave. My people will accept you, just as the sea has." Canoes carved from single tree trunks rested on the sand, each etched with Hammond circuit patterns that glimmered faintly in the light, and thatched roof houses adorned with shells and carvings scattered the shoreline as the island village stretched along the beach and climbed the hillside as if it had grown directly out of the ground. Izuku noticed that life was pulsing with rhythm everywhere. Women humming softly synchronized their breath with their net weaving tasks. Men used Hammond to harden their tools by blowing sharp exhales while carving wood and coral. While some stumbled over themselves while attempting to imitate their elders' breathing exercises, others ran barefoot along the beach, glowing with the smallest ripples of energy. Then Izuku noticed something subtle. A few villagers stood at the periphery of the crowd, carrying baskets or fishing tools, and each one had a subtle quirk, like soft coral hair, webbed hands, or a faint glow on their fingertips. They all appeared to be subdued. "They're quirked," Tula said in a whisper to Izuku as she leaned against a post. "Avoid staring. It's complicated here." "Complicated?" Izuku blinked. "Their family," Tula shrugged, "but this island, it's Hammond first, quirk second. It's evident in their eyes." Izuku's chest tightened as he saw a boy with tiny bioluminescent freckles look at him and then quickly look away, his shoulders hunching. This was the first time he had ever seen quirk users feel like the odd man out. Tane put a hand on his shoulder after noticing his expression. "Little wave, Hammond is our way. Hammond is the essence of life itself, but quirks are a gift from the world. People with peculiarities can still learn how to use the breath, though." With a slow exhale, Izuku recalled all the times he felt like the odd man out at home, and the thought made his stomach turn. The village was bustling with preparation by the afternoon. With carved conch shells that could transmit low, rumbling signals across the water using Hammond vibrations, scouts in canoes set out for Dead Reef. As Hammond infused wood and stone, warriors sharpened their weapons, their movements rhythmic, each exhale glowing faintly. Surrounded by interested children, Tula and Sloane inspected their equipment as Sloane disassembled her shotgun for cleaning and Tula refilled her glitter paint bombs. Izuku trailed behind Tane to a carved meeting hut with a view of the water. A stone bowl of seawater, still as glass, sat in the center, and the walls were carved with spirals of waves and suns, representing generations of Hammond warriors. Tane knelt next to it and motioned for Izuku to come over. "Take a breath, tiny wave. Feel the island's pulse. We listen before we fight." Izuku shut his eyes, breathed through his nose, and felt the ocean's tiniest pulse in his chest. The distant crash of waves, the hum of Kamiko swimming outside, the coordinated breathing of a whole island that coexisted with the sea. He opened his eyes and saw the faint glow of Tane's tattoos. "You are welcome here," he said gently. "But remember, tomorrow, the ocean will test if you deserve her trust." Izuku sat cross-legged on a woven mat near a bonfire, his harmonic sea turtle Kamiko comfortably resting in a shallow, glowing tide pool next to the gathering, the ocean painted in gold and lavender as the sun melted into the horizon, and the air was warm and heavy with the smell of grilled fish, taro, and sweet coconut. The village came alive with rhythm all around him. The steady, slow rhythm of hollow logs and drums matched the sea's pulse. Dancers breathed loudly and deliberately as they moved in broad, flowing circles, with Hammond permeating each motion. Youngsters ran after one another, some mimicking the warriors' movements while others laughed in the briny air.
I will continue this series in next part. Till then, bye bye.